Good morning, all. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. This regular scheduled meeting of the Board of Architectural and Engineering Examiners taking place in Conference Room 1A of the Davy Crockett Tower at 500 James Robinson Parkway, Nashville, Tennessee, and notice of this board meeting was posted on the board website on March 31st, 2014. Thank you. Roll call.
Susan Ballard.
Here.
Hal Balthrop.
Here.
Wilson Borden.
Here.
Robert Campbell.
Here.
Jerome Headley.
Here.
Philip Lim. Bill Lockwood.
Here.
Rick Thompson.
Here.
Frank Wagster.
Here.
Ricky Bersai.
Here.
Laura Reinbold. Stephen King.
Here.
You have a forum.
Thank you. I'd like
Quorum.
to acknowledge, what?
I said forum, I meant quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge our guest. If y'all would like to stand and introduce yourselves. I know you've signed in, but thank you, Don. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Any announcements? I guess seeing none. The agenda for any changes and/or additions? I see no one. Changes, so we will accept the agenda as shown, and we'll go into the open forum to discuss the qualification-based selection, which I think, I guess there was, everybody signed in the back, so we can kind of have a record of who was here, and there was packages back there that address that. And so I guess, opening up, John, do you want to kind of?
Yeah, I'm going to move up here.
Okay.
Back while I'm talking. I'm John Cawthorn. I'm the board's executive director and appreciate all of y'all coming this morning. In the packets in the back, we have the board's notice that was issued last year and was recently revised regarding proposals for professional services for public projects. TCA 12-4-107A requires that design professionals for public projects in Tennessee be selected through qualifications-based selection rather than through the competitive bid process. The board adopted a rule last year that gives the board authority to discipline a registrant who submits a bid, a fee, in response to a request from a state or local entity. So that's how the board basically got involved in this discussion regarding qualifications-based selection. You also have a draft of some frequently asked questions about QBS for public projects following that notice I referred to. Some of these questions have been published in the board's last newsletter, which is on our website to provide guidance primarily to registrants, but also building officials and local jurisdictions, et cetera. Some of these are in the process of being amended, and this particularly I would point you to the highlighted questions. These are questions that are still very much in a draft form that have not been published at this point, one of which we don't even have a draft answer to. So we're definitely seeking input from you on responses to some of these questions, and certainly we welcome any questions that you may have of the board as to how the board interprets the statute and enforces the rule that was recently adopted. Also, you do have in your packets the law that our rule refers to. It was formerly 12-4-106. Last year, the legislature amended the law and they moved this section to 12-4-107. So our rule still refers to 12-4-106, but actually it's that section's been moved, as I said, to 12-4-107. But you do have a copy of that particular statute as well, just for your information. And I think that's all the comments that I had to make. And for the board's information, in your iPads, I think it starts on page 51 on your
Correct.
iPads. This information, you do have a policy opinion regarding transportation planning that was adopted by the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. I included this because it ties in directly with the discussion we had at the last meeting about metropolitan planning organizations and planning studies of this nature, and that the Texas Board found that certain studies do constitute the practice of engineering, and they define those studies in some detail in this policy. So that may inform your discussion on that particular question this morning. So, Mr. Chair, I guess you can
Thank
proceed.
you. Hal, you had one comment?
Well, just a comment, and I don't know if it would benefit, and if not, then we don't need to do it. But I've been asked by many, if there's some history or what is the basis for this particular rule. And I wondered if maybe we could just have a brief and concise just discussion about the Brooks Act, and if maybe John can give a little insight, and then maybe Candy, if she's willing to kind of give a little background on why this is an issue. Is that okay? Okay.
Well, the federal Brooks Act, that's the federal law that basically says you have to select design professionals through qualifications-based selection. That was first adopted in '72, Robert. We looked into this yesterday during our engineer committee meeting. I think somebody looked it up on Wikipedia, I believe. And that's a reliable source. And 72 is when that law passed, and then many states subsequent to that date established their own QBS laws, typically called mini Brooks Acts, and Tennessee's, as I said, is in section 12-4-107. And the reasoning behind that is, and the societies, perhaps Candy could probably speak better to this, the feeling is that requiring that design professionals be selected through qualifications-based selection is in the best interest of the public for a number of reasons, that ultimately it can reduce the cost involved over a long period of time, that ensures that you're getting the most qualified person, obviously, for that particular assignment, who has the specific expertise that's needed. And there's many reasons for that, some of which kind of fall outside the scope of the board, certainly, but I'm sure maybe Candy or the board members may want to provide more detail on the reasoning behind it. But is that kind of what you had in mind? Okay.
I don't know if Candy wants to offer any other.
And I do have some information from NSPE's position statement on it, but.
Andy Toller with the Tennessee Society of Professional Engineers and the American Council of Engineering Companies of Tennessee. I didn't quite come prepared to talk about that this morning, but I know that it is an issue, generally speaking, because if you hire somebody based on price, you often end up paying more for an inferior product because you're ending up paying for change orders when they figure out, once they're into into producing the project, that they really don't have the expertise available, and that's why it came about. And I think that the Brooks Act covers money that receives federal funding at some level, in some amount.
And one interesting justification for it in the NSPE statement is that it allows small firms to compete for contracts based on quality of services provided on equal footing with larger firms. So I thought that's an interesting way to approach it. Again, that's kind of outside the scope of the board, but I think that's a good reason, certainly, to support it.
The idea is that you get somebody who knows how to do the kinds of projects that you want built, as opposed to somebody learning about how to do it.
Thank you, Candy. Anyone else would like to address the board, discuss, questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear if they wouldn't mind representatives from the municipalities and the counties. If they have a position on this, or if they have any comments, I would love to. I'm the public member of this board, so I'm not an architect nor an engineer. So I would appreciate hearing from that side of the question if they care to comment.
Say one thing too about that. We've had several registrants contact the board because they have been concerned that if they offer on any public projects particularly, that they might be in violation of this rule or law. And that's why it's an issue, and we're trying to work through it and, certainly protect the interests of the public health and safety and welfare, much like you all do as well. But we thought having this conversation would help us get to an end result that might be universal.
Oh, I'm Sharon Rollins. I'm with the Municipal Technical Advisory Service of the University of Tennessee. Advise municipalities on this matter. We have documents on this process, and I believe we are in compliance with law and the rules of this body. One of the benefits, I think, of going through this process in a proper format is to engage the municipalities. A lot of times, they have a project in mind and they really haven't thought through the details. Hire an engineering firm to come and do something for them, but they don't know quite what the something is. So this keeps them engaged, and they become partners in holding down cost and getting a better product. And I think the engineering community can probably agree. We wholeheartedly endorse this project and this process and try to encourage our clients to use it properly. Often serve as ex officio members on their selection committees, so try to be in there with guidance and forms on how to use the process and so forth.
Thank you. Robert?
First of all, thank you for your comments, and I'm glad that the service that you all provide is exactly what we're trying to get at, because a lot of times what we see when it comes on the other side is a municipality or a local government has hired somebody not understanding the scope of the project, not understanding the cost of the project, and then they start developing unrealistic expectations on what they can do. And before long, a project that was supposed to cost $2 million cost $5 million. And we believe, as you all do, that this is a better way to make sure that that process gets off on the right foot, so that at the end of the day, the municipality gets what they want and they're not having these legacy costs that continue to haunt them based on a poorly organized project from the beginning. And we've encouraged our client, our people, our engineers to be involved with their local communities too, to help. Sometimes there are technical questions that come up on different things that have been able to help provide some information that will help also guide them to a better selection. So I appreciate hearing your words and thankful that you all are helping to kind of do the same thing on the front end, because a project that started off poorly never ends up well. I mean, it just never does. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ask for a comment, I will give you one. I am David Parker. I'm the city engineer, CIP executive for the city of Franklin, Tennessee. We wholeheartedly support the qualifications-based selection process. We follow it to the best of our ability. I think we follow it in all of our projects. But I think very helpful, and we think a whole lot better projects out of it. So I just want to say we support it would ask that maybe you support, and I know we're not talking about design build abilities for municipalities to go that route, which we can't do right now, so.
I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation, but I'll go ahead. I mean, loudest mouth sometimes does that. But first of all, thank you for that too. And some of the other input, and maybe not today, that we would like to hear from especially local authorities, how we streamline the process for both of us to make it not so the request for qualifications and some of those things make it easier on both bodies, because we know you all generate a lot of time reviewing those proposals, and we, as a practitioner, we generate a lot of time preparing those. So any suggestions that you would, I'm not necessarily today, but this is the general comment, any suggestions that anybody would have on how to streamline that process would be welcomed by us, and I'm sure welcomed by all, because I think that's one of the things sometimes that people look at and say, you mean I've got to go do this, this, and this? That's going to take this amount of time. I can't wait that long. So we've got to compress that. So any of those kind of comments we would appreciate as well.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Don Baltimore, General Counsel for the Tennessee Interior Design Coalition, which is pleased to be invited to participate in this forum today. The Tennessee Interior Design Coalition supports the statute and the rule requiring design professionals for public projects to be chosen by qualification-based selection instead of competitive bidding. Tennessee Interior Design Coalition supports the board's objective to safeguard the public's health, safety, and welfare by assisting design professionals in submitting proposals that conform to the statute and the rules. The coalition further supports the board's goal that such proposals fall within the limits of the rules of professional conduct while providing information to assist local governments in selecting the most qualified design professionals for public projects. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Cates with American Institute of Architects, Tennessee chapter. I know everybody probably already knows our position on this. We strongly support QBS and believe that it should still stay in effect. We believe QBS provides owners with a selection process that's not only straightforward and easy to implement, but it's objective and fair. It recognizes the design professionals play a critical role in the public building process. So please let me know if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer or find an architect that will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Solar, as I said before, and I'm with two engineering associations. And ACEC of Tennessee has some comments to make about qualifications-based selection. Both organizations strongly support it. We have supported it for many years. And in the 90s, we even supported with AIA someone who did some training on qualifications-based selection. We haven't done that since 1999, but we have for a long time strongly supported qualifications-based selection. There is something that ACEC is concerned about. It's our understanding that you said that the law only applies to procurement of the prime consultant or contractor using QBS, not the procurement of subconsultants. And this interpretation has created a loophole in which engineering and architectural services are being procured based on price for public projects and agencies. ACEC of Tennessee believes that any firm or individual that's been contracted to provide professional services subject to 124107A is a representative of the public agency, and the requirements of TCA 124107A should apply to the procurement of subconsultants as well, thereby prohibiting private entities from procuring architect and engineering services for public projects. Based on this interpretation, any architect or engineer that enters into a contract on any basis other than direct negotiation for projects under the QBS law should be subject to disciplinary action regardless of whether the actual contract executed with the architect or the engineer is with the public entity or a third party. The current interpretation of TCA 124107 allows architects and engineers who've been selected using QBS for public projects to select subconsultants on a competitive basis. We recommend that the QBS selection criteria flow down from the owner to all consultants and subconsultants.
Yesterday at our engineering committee meeting, we did discuss that, and it's still
Morning. My name is Margaret Maharia, and I am the Executive Director of the Tennessee Municipal League. And I've got to honestly tell you, this has not been on my agenda, and neither has it been on my board's agenda, so I think this is something I probably need to take to them, is to educate them. And so that's the side that I'm coming from to you this morning. I have no prepared comments. This is just off the top of my head. But all of you are professionals in your fields. And sometimes you don't understand, as Mr. if I could see, that would help also. The public. And I'm sure that some of our council members who have engaged in projects where they have used this process have probably heard, well, how come they didn't take low bid? And sometimes I think an educational process of some sort to educate the public about why the process that you have adopted is very important, because I'm sure we've even had some council members who have said, well, why don't we take low bid? And I used to work for the state, and we always had to take low bid, and I knew it was not always the proper thing for us to do, but I had no choice. And so I think educating the public, because if you are aware of how our society is changing and the atmosphere that your public officials are now having to operate in, then the public attitude is very important. Because, quote, they are spending taxpayer dollars and they expect you to sometimes be cheap and take low bid. So anything you can do along those lines as far as educational opportunities for the public good, I think that would be most helpful to everyone. Thank you.
Ricky?
Thank you for those comments. And it's hope that having the law and educating people that the law exists actually helps public officials, because when they get those questions, they can say it's really not to their discretion to take a fee basis competitive bid, that they have to base their selection on qualifications. So it takes it out of their hands, really, and hopefully that's a help to them.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on what Candy was discussing as far as sub-consultant. In just the way we handle that is we do require, as a part of the RFQ process, that the whole team of a project or the professional projects be submitted as part of that RFQ process. So you're asking about the process and how we go through and do it. That's just one way to handle that on the front end, if that's a policy of, or I don't know how you say you have to do that, but that's just the way we handle that sort of thing, which eliminates then that shopping or not getting the professionals as the sub.
Thank you, David. Robert?
Just quickly respond to your, and I appreciate those comments and thank you for that part of it. And we do need to do a better job on the education side with the public. A couple things that are happening, and one of those parts of the education is this doesn't take price out of the equation. I think that's one of the big myths about qualifications-based selection. You go to number one doesn't meet your price, you can go to number two. You can go to number three. So you still have a price negotiation that goes on during this process. You're just negotiating with qualified firms, which that's, I think, something that we have to do better at educating the public on, because they hear qualification, I think it's just an open checkbook, which that's not the case. The second thing is, where it relates to procurement policies, there has been some push, now this is on the federal level, probably more than others, to not just factor price as your only means of, even on contracted jobs. It's time frame that you can deliver, it's experience and qualifications even of contractors. So in some arenas, they're starting to move into more than just competitive pricing. And again, that's an education process too, because they've seen that taking the best value bidder is much better long-term than taking the lowest bidder. And I'm sure anybody in this room can have their own horror story about this guy was bonded and he was low bidder, and we never got the project done. I mean, I can tell you 5 right now if you want to hear them, but you don't. So I think the push is, and it's part of this education and just for the board, is we need to concentrate on the value of the process long-term rather than that one specific thing of cost and price. But I appreciate what you said, because I've been in a lot of those council meetings and things, and they focus on that one number because that's the one thing that can be understood. So thank you.
My name's Kip Mayton. I'm with TDOT Local Programs Development Office. And I did not plan on speaking today, but I just wanted to make the board aware of our process. When 4 times a year, we speak to municipalities about what we do. We fund construction projects and transportation projects specifically. And we do inform them of the Brooks Act and the process by which they are to go through the negotiations and things like that.
Well, you endorse it, it sounds like.
Oh, yes, we definitely endorse it.
Go
Yes.
ahead, Dr. Rick.
Yeah, just one comment from an architect's perspective in regard to the QBS selection process. To touch on what Robert said, once we have been identified as the front runner, if you will, in a project, the price does come into effect in certain arenas, and the way that we deal with that is that if they've got a maximum number they can't exceed, I mean, it's just going to be an honesty policy when you're negotiating with your client, then your scope of work will reflect what that number is. So you can't do everything that they may want you to do for $50,000, but you can identify your shopping list of services that you can do for $50,000. And that still gives the municipalities the ability to negotiate to some degree, but it also protects the architects and engineers from just having to have a $50,000 fee shoved down their throat, and the expectations are not realistic. So that negotiation part is very important, that we trust each other enough to know, or a lot of municipalities just use the state sliding scale, which that's definitely qualification-based selection. You know, everybody's gonna get paid the same, and so you're on equal footing, large firm, small firm, whatever. If your expertise allows you to do that particular project, then you're going to be compensated properly. So I like to use that formula, and where I'm from in Chattanooga, all the municipal area around there, they utilize the state sliding scale, and it just keeps it clean, so.
The gentleman just spoke. Do you have a business card? The only reason I ask that is there's one little provision in your local programs thing that I want to discuss with you, but I don't want to take up this time, that has some stuff on that. So, and the reality is it'd take me another 3 days to find it. It's 2 sentences. So anyway.
Hal,
Just real quick, I guess maybe from this discussion, we might have some recommendations or actions, but maybe with TML particularly, if John could coordinate with Ms. Meharry on their meeting schedule, and depending on what part of the state is, perhaps we could send a representative to your meeting if it suits your agenda. Okay, good. I figured. I didn't, not an original thought, but just wanted to be formal in stating that, so.
On back.
Ashley Cates with AIA. I also wanted to offer up, not myself, but a board member or a government relations committee member on any education that you all have. If you need assistance, someone there from the architects, I'll be happy to help make that happen.
Ditto for the end. To follow up on what Robert said about the long-term value, and that is the entire life cycle cost of the building. Because somebody who's chosen based on qualifications may be able to produce a cheaper building because that person knows how to do it, uses different techniques for different aspects of the job, and we've never actually talked about that. I'm not an engineer, so I can't talk about it in depth, but overall, the cost of the building during its 50-year lifespan, or however long it is, could be less expensive long-term, and sometimes politicians think only in short-term.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mike Harris, the Director of Engineering for the City of Brentwood, and I'm in the middle of a couple of these processes right now myself, and so we certainly support QBS. We think it's the right way to build public projects. I think the challenge, though, is with qualifications-based selection is just that. It's a really subjective process, and you don't see a lot of information about how to go through that. You know, obviously, you're going to look at previous projects and things like that to make your decision, and I rarely see a situation where I've got an engineering firm that's here and a bunch of others that are here. It's not like that. You know, I mean, there's a lot of quality firms in this area, and typically what I get into is how do you make that final selection? I mean, I've even had recently a project where we had multiple people within our organization evaluate the proposals, you know, try to rank them with certain criteria and come up with a matrix like a lot of us do. 3 firms that all scored exactly the same. So, I don't know, you flip a coin, you base it on something. But I think that's the challenge. If we had some more objective, and we probably will never get away from some subjectivity in that selection process, but that's the challenge. And then sort of a philosophical thing for me is if the object is to select the best qualified firm for the job, which I think that's what the intent of the Brooks Act is. The person who can, the firm who has the most qualified staff, the most talent to do that job, then theoretically, for certain types of projects, we'd all be using the same firm. Again, it comes down to somewhat a subjective evaluation. And to speak to, I apologize not remembering the lady's name, but I think another little bit of challenge in the not bringing cost into the equation at all is trying to be accountable to the budget and to our finance folks and making sure that price that we are negotiating is reasonable. And we all use certain percentages and things of cost to try to get that. But I think those are the 2 biggest challenges. I think everybody's going to support QBS, at least I do, and we do at the City of Brentwood. But that evaluation process and trying to put some objectivity in it, and then making sure that we're accountable for cost and so forth. So, thank you.
Thank you. Al?
I think that's a great comment, or great comments that you've made, and I have been both I currently am in the public sector, but I've also been a consultant. Consultants, the nature of the work, just as any industry, is to continuously have work opportunities to sustain yourself. So, and I agree, Nashville is very fortunate, or the Middle Tennessee area is very fortunate to have an abundance of qualified firms. And my current employment situation, I work for the city of Nashville, and I've often been on selection panels, and it does become tough. But one of the things that and again, not that our method is the best, certainly, but what we have found is when we shortlist and then go to the second tier and do interviews and discover through that process what the capacity of the firm is able to do based on existing assignments that they have. And also even for, Nashville's a little larger than many cities, again, trying to distribute work because we want to support the community, the engineering community, the families, and everyone that's associated with those for the local economy. So some of those things come into play as well. So to your point specifically on any guidance, I think, one of the discussions that might result from this would be that the engineering and architectural societies particularly maybe review that as a prospect and a subject for a forum for discussion, and then we could be a part of to help define that. One of the nice things about doing qualification-based selection when a criteria used in that is experience with similar type projects, one of the pluses from a financial standpoint is not only do you get references from the locations where these projects occurred, but also typically the offer of the services will include the costs associated with that project. So we all have a general idea if the projects are similar in nature, particularly what kind of range of costs might occur, even though we know geographically there are differences in costs depending on where projects are and that kind of thing, but it does give you a sense of that. But in that process too, calling the references I've found has been very insightful. Now, most people, even on a personal resume, are only going to list references maybe that they feel like are going to give them a good one, and that's something you have to be guarded about. But I have had occasions where references cited on projects were very frank about some of the concerns they had with that particular firm, and that was very insightful as well. So again, perhaps the technical societies or professional societies might want to make that a topic of discussion, because I think we all have the ultimate goal in mind. We just need to maybe have, again, a universal method of getting to that end result.
I have a couple of comments. The first one is that the state of Tennessee projects that I've been involved with, it's normal for them to require me to solicit proposals from geotechnical surveyors, asbestos abatement consultants, and other consultants, and they always require us to get a fee. And typically they're after I've been selected. That's right. And so that kind of calls into the question what I think Candy's referring to. And, if it's state law and we're following state rules, that's kind of a conflict, I think. The second thing is, and this is kind of talking to us architects and engineers, is, the rules, the responsibility of not submitting fees is to the architects and engineers. And so if a municipality puts out a proposal that requests a fee, it's our responsibility to say that's against our rules and regulations. And so in that way, if you're putting out a proposal that requests and to say it bluntly, a fee proposal, you're asking the architects and engineers to violate the rules and regulations of the state law. And so, we do have the AIA and the engineering societies. Unfortunately, they don't represent every architect in Tennessee or every engineer in Tennessee. And I've already had several times had to advise whoever is soliciting proposals that we can't submit a fee, and I give them the rules and regulations and why we can't do that. But the biggest problem, I think, is if we can get to all the architects and all the engineers and say you can't do this, then However, the municipalities or whoever tries to get a fee proposal, they won't be able to do it because they've been informed that that's against the law. We can't do that. All I got.
An additional comment to what we've experienced. Most recently, a municipality asked for a submittal and also asked for a fee submittal in a separate envelope. And it's in the frequently asked questions how that is also considered giving a price for a project. Even though it says it will not be used for the selection of the architects or engineers, it's still a violation in submitting any kind of a fee to get selected, whether it's in a separate envelope or not. So we've had to pass on quite a few projects for different municipalities in that, we're not going to violate the state law or the rules. So I think that's a part of an education process as well for the municipalities. I mean, they're going to negotiate the fee with you if you're selected. So that puts us in jeopardy, and we would just appreciate not having to do that.
Good morning. I'm Shauna Billingsley, and I'm the city attorney for the city of Franklin. And to comment on your point, one thing we have to remember is our boards change sometimes every 2 years. And we got a lot of people who are coming in on our boards that are coming from the private world. They don't understand sometimes when you're dealing with public buildings what the rules are. So if we're going to do a educational process, I would suggest we do one that cities can use and re-implement every 2 years. This can't be something that we talk about today and not revisit it in 2 years, because we have elections all the time. So I think that's something we need to think about.
That's a good point. Go ahead, Wilson.
Amen to, amen to that suggestion. I'm going to ask a question because I'm not clear on how this works, but excuse me. Let's make an assumption that I'm sitting on a local school board, and we've decided we need to expand our elementary school by building 4 more classrooms and a gymnasium that we didn't have initially and that sort of thing. So it's going to be a reasonably good-sized project. And we were very pleased with the architect and engineer who originally designed that particular facility. And they have all the plans and specs and everything. We even liked the contractor. He did a good job, and we didn't have any problems. So is there some kind of provision or some process that you can use to see if you could bring that same team back to do your expansion, or do you start again with the initial way of getting your qualification based?
I think one of the considerations on that is what the local procurement code allows, and every jurisdiction has a If a project, and it depends on whether the original project was completely closed out. We all know that during the course of construction, there are going to be changes. Question is that it would depend on what the local procurement code would allow. Federal or local or public monies are used on a public project, I think it always
I think in that case, if your municipality required you to talk to more than one company, then you would interview 3 companies, and the most qualified you would select. And if you felt like it was highly qualified, the previous company was highly qualified, especially because of their experience, that's still a qualification-based selection. If your local municipality didn't require you to go talk to 3 people and you selected that firm to negotiate, and that's still a qualifications-based selection. You're selecting that qualifications reasons rather than a price reason.
I'm just going to speak from the public standpoint, I guess. In the real world, I think what happens in that situation is you put 3, 4, 5 firms through the process, and you determine that your former team was the best and could do the best job, so you select them, and 4 or 5 firms have gone through a lot of time, effort, and to propose on something that wasn't ever going to probably happen to begin with. I may be wrong, but I suspect that's how it's going to play out. So I'm not saying we can solve that problem. I'm just saying that's kind of where it is. And actually, I've been involved when other architectural firms just said, we appreciate you inviting us, but we're not going to propose on this because I think we can see where this is going, and we pass. So you wind up with one anyway. So tricky thing to work through.
One more comment, and I will say on that that the municipality they have a choice about how much information they require firms to submit. Like the state of Tennessee, on a project of that size, the qualifications that we submit don't take a long time to put together. They're a list of similar jobs, and then a couple of resumes, and those are, if you're interested in doing the work, it's not a big investment. So that it's not always days and days of preparation that you have to do, just depending on the requirement. Have it make sense in the real world.
Yeah, one comment, Wilson, is you're not required to bid out professional services. You can select that architect and negotiate the fee with them. What that boils down to is your local government agency may have a requirement that you bid out, but there's no requirement. If that didn't exist, you can go to the architect you want and negotiate the fee.
So there is a way to get to that then?
Right.
Okay.
John?
Oh, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out a provision in TCA 124107 that may have some bearing on Mr. Wilson's or Borden's scenario. Paragraph 4 of Section A says that a city, county, or a utility district having a satisfactory existing working relationship for architectural or engineering services may expand the scope of the services, provided that they are within the technical competency of the existing firm without exercising this section requiring the selection based on qualifications. So that may apply in this particular case.
I just wanted to add to that, the answer is it may, or in legal term, it depends.
Good morning. I'm John Reedy with Gresham Smith & Partners. I'm here to say I support QBS, and I admit I'm relatively new to practicing in Tennessee. Practiced for 25 years, mostly in other states, but live here now. I'm very happy to be here. But I can tell you some of the horror stories from other states where they don't utilize QBS and what can happen. You end up in price selections with the public thinking they're getting a great bargain, but the important thing to realize is you're not buying widgets or a defined product, you're buying a professional service, often on something that's not terribly defined. You need the help of the architect and engineer to help define what the project is. So you end up with apples and orange comparisons when you get a price based that early in the process. That's the background of why QBS is needed. And you end up with the fees from an architect and engineer is a small percentage of the overall project cost, but they can have a huge impact, those services, on what the overall project cost is. So yes, it is a factor after you're selected. You negotiate rates, and a good design ends up in lower construction costs and also lower life cycle costs over the life of the building. And just last thing I'd like to say, and thank you for your time, is that I heard described before what sometimes is known as the one-step, two-envelope process, where you submit a price in a sealed envelope. But that is common in other states, especially some of the neighboring states to here. And some folks might feel that actually complies with QBS because you don't open the price till after the selection. So I think that's just probably a matter of education. If it doesn't comply, some people think that is actually complying with it. Thank you.
John? Oh, I just left it up from my previous comment. I did have a suggestion, though. If you think this might be a good procedure, we could maybe go through some of the more controversial FAQ responses. Maybe we're not certain of the correct answer, but we might get some input from the audience on those particular questions.
Okay, go ahead.
And everybody should have a copy of this. So we have some on the table in the back if you don't have a copy of the FAQs the board has developed. And again, just want to make sure that every guest is signed in on our sign-in sheet in the back as well. The first several questions, I don't know that there would be a lot of controversy regarding those. To what projects does TCA Section 124107 apply? That basically just quotes the statute that it applies to all contracts for architectural, engineering, and construction services procured by any municipal corporation, county, state, development district, utility district, human resource agency, or other political subdivision created by statute. And some of our previous communications did refer to public works projects, and just want to clarify, because there has been a little confusion about that should not be understood in the narrow sense of projects associated with public works departments. Now we just refer to them as public projects to avoid that confusion. One question that's generated some comments is question 3. Does TCA 124107 encompass studies and other services that do not involve the preparation of sealed plans? And the response to that is that in the event that any study or service, such as property condition assessments, planning studies, or other documents requires professional services and expertise, or if these professional services are offered by the proposer, it would fall under the scope of the statute. If anybody has comments on these, I guess we could allow time for them to come forward if they choose. One question that Rob and I have been discussing, this came up during our engineer committee meeting yesterday, that we may need to change. I'm not sure what our solution is on this. Question 6, does TCA 124107A apply to landscape architectural services? The statute only specifically references architectural and engineering services. Our previous interpretation was landscape architecture would be included because the qualifications are very similar. It's just the licensing process is very similar among those three professions. But Rob is wavering on that interpretation now, so I'm not really sure where we stand there. I don't know if that might require an AG opinion to determine. And at one time, he was thinking maybe interior design services might be included as well, but we've kind of gone back and forth on that, so I don't really know how to resolve that.
We have supported it, so we can
Yeah.
talk about it.
Of course, interior design, we only regulate use of the title, not the practice, so it's certainly different from the other three professions in that sense. Do y'all have any feeling? Robin, do you have any input on that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just want to make you aware of that may be a question that changes in the future.
John?
Yes.
Back, if you don't mind, back to number 3. That could also fall under that paragraph you read previously, where you have a relationship with, say, a school board, and they want to do an assessment on a building, and you can provide those services with them and negotiate your contract. I mean, that wouldn't be in violation of,
No, I don't think so.
okay.
No.
Because
Not-
we
not-
get
not based on that
approached,
section.
By existing clients that we've got that relationship with, that they know that we can give them a good facilities, report or something, so.
Statute would allow for that.
Yeah.
At least in some cases, right? It depends.
Depends.
Yes. Okay. Is it permissible for a registrant, this is number 7, for a registrant to provide a description of intended compensation, that is, whether you charge a fixed fee, percentage, et cetera, in response to a RFQ, RFP for a public project? The answer is yes, provided that a specific monetary amount or percentage is not included in the response. You're simply saying, I will charge a fixed fee, or, that's all. You're not saying what the fee is, or the percentage. Number 8, is it permissible for a registrant to submit hourly rates and an estimate of man-hours required to complete a design project in response to a RFQ, RFP for a public project? The answer is no, because that could be used to determine their compensation and compare the compensation. So, no on that one. Number 9, this is the one that we just mentioned, is it permissible for a registrant to submit a price in a sealed envelope in response to a RFQ, RFP? No, registrants may only state compensation to a prospective client in direct negotiation following selection based on qualifications. This is probably one of the most common questions that we've been getting about QBS.
One of the comments on the sealed envelope, from what I understand it, the purpose of the sealed envelope is to kind of establish a preliminary budget, if you will, for the services. And I think there's other ways for the people asking for the proposal to do that. I mean, they can actually set that range in the RFP or RFQ to say, our estimated budget or whatever is X number of dollars. They can, obviously, with MTAS and some of the other organizations, they can use some professional service people or other things to come up with what those expected fees are, so that you at least have a basis when you begin that negotiation to understand roughly how much that service ought to cost. Because I think that's one of the reasons for the sealed envelope is we just don't want to pick this person and they're $100,000 more than what the norm is, but we're locked into some of that and we didn't know type thing. So just keep in mind there are other ways. The sealed envelope thing has been a practice in the past, but there are other ways to get to the same answer that don't violate our rule here. So, for those that live and die by the sealed envelope, there are other ways to do that.
And that ties into question 11, which has not been published at this point. This is one that Mr. Campbell originally drafted. What alternate methods are available for determining possible architectural, engineering, or landscape architectural cost? A, enlist the aid of a professional or agency such as a development district in determining the scope of the project for RFQ. This should allow a realistic budget for the entire project, including construction, so that price surprises are minimized. B, state the budget range for professional services in the RFQ. The budgeted amount allows the design professional to determine if they can meet the stated requirements within the budget range and minimizes review time for the municipality. And C, use standard cost basis schedules, such as used by the State Building Commission or Rural Development, to determine expected design cost. These schedules have been used for many years by both governments and design professionals to establish reasonable compensation for projects of various sizes.
That's good.
Okay, you have comments later. Yeah. So that's the draft language. Also, number 10 is about the pre-qualification procedure that we've got several questions on this. A jurisdiction requests responses to a RFQ. Responses are evaluated to pre-qualify firms for participation in the RFP process. Pre-qualified proposers then submit formal proposals, including fees, for consideration and final selection. The board's interpretation is that this procedure does not comply with the law and the rule that's been adopted, that you would need to, as I think that's already been discussed, you would need to pick the most qualified firm and then try to negotiate with them. If that doesn't work out, you move to the next most qualified, et cetera, rather than just having them all pre-qualified in this fashion. And again, this is just a method that's been utilized to try to speed up the process, and the board certainly is sensitive to those concerns, but the primary concern is to comply with the law, of course. Number 16, we don't have an answer to this one yet. This was discussed at length at our last meeting. Does the law and the rule apply to transportation planning services for metropolitan planning organizations? We never came to a conclusion on that question. And you do have the policy opinion from Texas on that may or may not assist you in that. Just gives you information on what another state's determined. And number 17, this is the one that Candy questioned. Does the law and rule apply to subconsultants who do not contract directly with the government agency? In consultation with Rob, looking at the law, at least previously, we felt that it would not apply to subconsultants. Of course, ACEC disagrees with that interpretation, as we heard. Certainly open to discussion as well. So those are, I think, the more controversial questions, or questions that we haven't published yet, at least.
Comments, discussions, recommendations? Oh, here we go.
I'm just going to say, relative to the subconsultants, one of the things we do as part of the RFQ is just ask that they identify their team member.
Guess I would question why we don't have an answer to 16 when in that if planning studies that are done by a design professional has to meet this process, and it would seem only appropriate that it would apply also to the Metropolitan Planning. Should anyway, but seems like we've already answered that with the answer on number 3.
I think the answer is we've not come to a consensus on that on the board. I tend to agree with your interpretation, though, that anytime there's engineering data, engineering services used as part of those studies, the MPO should fall under that same jurisdiction. They receive money from government funding sources just as any other entity does. So I don't see how you separate it, but I think we've not hashed that one out very much.
I think the discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, the discussion was there's some activities in a planning study that aren't considered engineering, and then the analysis of all that is considered engineering. So it may be that there are some activities that aren't considered engineering where this act wouldn't apply. I think that was the discussion.
That's in the Texas ruling. That's
Okay.
That's how they interpret that. I mean, is somebody going out and doing a traffic count? Are they observing, the number of cars, and they report that back to someone, and then it's substantiated by a professional? I mean, that's somebody in the field that's working for somebody, So I can see.
I have a question about when a municipality wants to retain an as their city engineer as far as they're not knowing what projects are going to be coming up in the next 2 or 3 years. They get into a contract with them. Do they follow the same procedures? Kind of an open-ended retainage, I guess, what you would call it.
Talking about an indefinite delivery process, I'm assuming, where you retain the service.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would assume that the owner problem's going to be if public funds are used for any projects that might come as a result of services needed, that again, state law and the local procurement code may address that. That you still need to go through a selection based on qualification project. But if the indefinite delivery relationship with a consulting firm is just to give advice on how to handle situations, that's a little different than actual professional service.
That's similar to the way that our program operates. If someone has a consultant that's retained as a city engineer, but not a full-time staff person, then that city engineer would be the person that would supervise the activities of the consultant who's actually on the specific project. Correct. That's how we interpret it. So, okay.
If no other comments, I guess we will close this forum. Is there anything else anybody else wants to say? We'll close the forum and move on to our next point of business.
Could we take a 10-minute break?
Yeah, we'll take a little break here, 10 minutes.
And thank all of you for coming today.
And yes, thank you very much for your comments and your time. And we think that further discussion and educational matters will need to be accommodated. We are calling this back in session. We will start with the consent agenda. Minutes from February 2014 attached.
Starts on page 57 on your iPads.
Sure everybody's read it and made any corrections.
And this includes the engineer committee minutes as well. Vote on them together.
Make a motion, we approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Staff complaint report.
It's on page 66 on your iPads. These are all complaints in which the respondent was disciplined in another jurisdiction. The discipline was less than a suspension or revocation, so in accordance with board policy, we issued a letter of caution and recommend closure. You can vote on these as a group.
Do I have any comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Passes, all of them. Next on the agenda is the professional society reports.
Ashley Cates with AIA Tennessee. Don't really have anything on the matter. We just know sessions about to wrap up. We had a pretty quiet year this year. The one major the fire sprinkler legislation, it was sent to I think a study committee, but our concerns are that we've heard rumblings that this might open the door for more discussion of issues like this for next session. So we'll keep you abreast of anything else we hear, but it's a concern that we have, especially in the rural areas. The rural, maybe some of the rural legislators have issues with the expense that you might have to incur due to the building size. But anyway, so that's what we're going to be working on throughout the summer for next session. Other than this, we had a really good day on the Hill. I'm sorry that you all couldn't be there. The architects that that are on the board were at NCARB, so my apologies for planning that during NCARB. Also, the convention is this summer, July 30th through August 1st. So we're really excited to be back in Nashville. And we just secured our keynote speaker this year for Steve Dumas. He won AIA Firm of the Year. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy Toller with the Tennessee Society and the American Council of Engineering Companies. I've given you all a copy of the program from our Engineering Excellence Award, which was on March the 11th, also the day of our Day on the Hill. And number 19 on page 18 was the Grand Iris Award winner, and that was Ross Bryan Associates for the structural work on the Music City Center, which was pretty exciting. Ashley mentioned their Day on the Hill and the fire sprinkler issue. Ashley had AIA's Day on the Hill on one week, and then the engineers followed the following week. And with that tag team, we were successful in getting the fire sprinkler bill referred. That came up the day after the engineers were on the Hill. So the timing was impeccable.
Yeah.
And it did go to summer study. The piping material bill, which we were also concerned about, was never presented in committee. We will be going to Washington at the end of this month to lobby at the federal level on infrastructure funding. And we will have our engineers conference with ASCE, ACEC, and TSPE on September 25th and 26th. And we hope that an engineer or two will be willing to have an open forum on the QBS issue again this year on the 26th. John will not be able to be there, unfortunately, because he's going to be elsewhere with Mr. Lockwood. And the session is winding down, but this is the time when it's the most dangerous because there are very few rules that are in play right now. I mean, I was at the Capitol on Tuesday, a resolution encouraging Congress to fund transportation in a long-range plan came up in State Government Committee at 8 o'clock in the morning. It was heard in Finance Committee in the middle of the day. It was reported out by Calendar and Rules Committee that afternoon, and it was scheduled for the following day. Now, they didn't get to it yesterday, but, that's how things are going right now. So we just have to be attentive all the time. I don't really have anything else to say. We do appreciate the fact that you had the open forum on qualifications-based selection, and I apologize that I wasn't prepared to just talk generally about qualifications-based selection. If John had given me a little warning, I could have, but I know.
It was my fault.
Hal
Sorry.
just threw out the curveball.
You did well.
But I did talk to Sharon Rollins with MTS. She's the woman with the silver hair who presented today. And she said that they are doing a session, and they do a regular session with newly elected public officials. And they have in the past done something on qualifications-based selection, so I will work with her to see how much time we have and to see whether we can get somebody there or at least provide some material for that piece of the puzzle. Thank you. Any questions of me? And I should say that the fact that the legislature is winding down is the reason why Nathan Ridley is not here, because he's up there. He's watching out for us.
Thank you again for inviting us to participate in the open forum. I thought it was very successful, as you can tell by the turnout we had, and also the support for your efforts in that. All I have to say about the legislature is I agree with both Ashley and Candy. It's more of a quiet session. Things that we were opposed to seem to have been either defeated or pushed away till next year. But now we need to keep our guard up for what will happen in the next few days as the legislature winds down. And as Candy said, most of the rules are suspended, so anything can happen. So thank you, and if we don't see you anymore, see you at next meeting.
Next, legal case reports.
Let me begin by introducing myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Robin Ryan. I am an attorney here. I'm a litigation attorney, which means I normally would be doing your litigation. But Rob has a conflict. He's the program attorney for other programs, and landscaping, or not landscaping, land surveyors is being held the same time as yours. So I'm here substitute. And just as a background, as I said, I'm a litigator, and I was in private practice where I was for 20 plus years. I did a lot of divorces, and now I take people's licenses, and I like to win. So having said that, that's what I will do for you. And also, I think that it's important to put this on the record. I have a father who's a PE and a husband who's a PE. Husband's mechanical, father's chemical, and both of them, one's inactive and one's retired, but I just wanted to put that on the record. And on a side point, when I was a child growing up, I could not understand why my father had PE on his business card, because physical education was not a part of what he did. So having said that, and having made sure that that is on there, we'll go ahead with the legal report. We'll start with cases with updated information. Case number, I'm just going to do the last numbers, 2013-022-491 and 2013-022-501. These complaints were previously presented at the December 5th, 2013 meeting as follows. The complaints allege that the respondents, licensed architects, committed misconduct in their professional practice by improperly submitting proposals for contracts to provide services for the same publicly funded project in potential violation of Tennessee Rule 0120-002-.02, proper conduct of practice. The complaint materials were forwarded to Architect Board Member Mr. Headley for review, determine if any probable cause existed for possible discipline. There are no complaint histories for these respondents. Based on this presentation, the Board approved a recommendation to authorize a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for $500 civil penalty and a requirement to take and pass the Board's law and rules examination. Updated information. Based on the ongoing board discussion, as you heard earlier today, this matter appears to involve a bidding situation solicited by the authority having jurisdiction as an addendum asking for monetary disclosure for budget purposes only, rather than the open bidding process. The recommendation was for a discussion to determine alternative discipline based on the proper application of the law and rule.
Say somebody was reviewing this?
Yes, Mr. Headley reviewed it.
Back in December.
Yes.
Yeah. Right, and this involved three firms, and, you know, the local authority that had put out the request for proposals did an addendum. And in the addendum, they said they had asked for a number, but that was not to be used in as part of the qualifications, because in their statement you saw how they were going to base their selection, and price was not in there. But the board felt that there was still action that needed to be taken on it regarding a fine, and I believe it was letter of caution. This was it was a gray. This was this gray area that the authority, because I know John had had discussion with this authority, and John did point out that, you know, fee cannot be considered. So I believe that's why this authority put out this addendum with that with their qualifying statement. One architect, well, let's see, one put a number in a sealed envelope, as it turned out. And they were one of the three firms that had been selected. And I believe that firm and the two others backed out of it, as memory memory serves me correct. But the board felt that we should take some action on this. And again, I believe it was some.
Civil penalty for $500.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. So that's how it stands at this point.
That was just information. It really, it's up to you all to make a decision based on your interpretation of the law and the rules as to what you want to do in this particular instance. I don't know why Rob brought it back. Maybe John.
Well,
can-
we've been contacted by a couple of attorneys in these particular cases, and on behalf of their clients, they maintain, well, the rule is somewhat ambiguous. It doesn't explicitly state that it's improper to submit bids in sealed envelopes. If the municipality, the government agency specifically states that those bids are not going to be considered in making the selection, the initial selection, so that they strongly feel that they did not violate this particular rule. So that's why we wanted to represent it, just for your consideration, in light of the ongoing discussions about how exactly to interpret the law and the rule.
You have a number of options. You can vote to accept what you have previously accepted. You can vote to do a letter of warning or a letter of instruction based on the discussions that have been ongoing. You could, even if you thought it was appropriate, you could change it and make a more substantial penalty if you thought that was appropriate, given the circumstances. I think, though, this is a lawyer's opinion, that based on the ongoing discussions and the interpretation of the rules and law, I think that's one of the reasons Rob felt strongly that it could be reviewed again.
Comments about this?
I wonder how much you spent on an attorney.
Well, I don't know, but having a mark as a professional on your license, this is one of the few organizations that I work for that I'll guarantee that when I do a hearing, there'll be an attorney on the other side.
Yeah. Well, based on the previous discussion and based on an earlier fine to another architect, I make the motion that we continue with this and try to collect our $500.
Second time.
Any other discussion? I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Can I have a quick discussion?
Yes.
Just because it's not specifically spelled out, this gentleman also never went through the process of contacting, which several have. So he had resources to avail himself of to determine if it was or if it wasn't. And he chose not to do that. So that's the reason we passed this law, or this rule, is to put the onus on the resident.
I've got a question to the attorney. We approve this if they take their lawyers and go to a hearing. At that point, one way or another, that question will be resolved.
Well, maybe. I know, a typical
Depends.
lawyer answer, right? It does depend. And here's why I say that. It's because the hearing will be before you all. In that hearing, you'll make a decision. After that decision, they have a right to appeal, and they will, and probably, because it can be considered ambiguous, they could appeal to the Chancery Court. At that point, the Chancery Court will also make a decision, and that decision can be to uphold what you did, say you were beyond your power to do what you did, or send it back for another hearing. That can also be appealed to the Court of Appeals. And then the Court of Appeals can issue an opinion, and then that opinion can then be reviewed by the Supreme Court if they so choose. So, yes, it could resolve it if no one challenges it from that point on.
Architect that I reviewed, and he has paid that, right? The one, yes, okay.
One in this similar
Yeah.
situation, yeah, that's paid it.
He gave a fee quote to a municipality school system.
Other comments, then call the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes to uphold
Well,
previous action.
thank you. Now, a number of the cases that are going to be presented this morning are cases that have been in litigation. For various reasons, they are back before you, and that involves the next case, which is 2010-033101. This matter was most recently presented at the December 5th, 2013 board meeting as follows. This matter was presented at the April 14th, 2011 board meeting as follows. This matter is referred to the board from the State Fire Marshal's Office with the concern that the respondent may have practiced outside his area of competence. The file also indicated issues that could be much more severe than simple misconduct or incompetence. The matter was referred to Associate Engineer Board member to determine any evidence to support this allegation, and a subsequent investigation and informal conference was held to obtain all available information for presentation to the board. The reviewing member was Mr. Heathcote. Note, despite the request that the representatives of the compliant Fire Marshal's Office attend this conference to promote full disclosure of relevant information, no such representative attended the informal conference. As a result, the matter proceeded with what information could be gathered in the absence of that input. The board discussion synopsis was as follows. The respondent is a currently licensed professional engineer providing services to installers of manufactured housing. The respondent conducts inspections of the foundations relative to compaction and support issues. These inspections were required to comply with federal housing and urban development standards and involve some calculations to prove conclusions. It is a lack of these conclusions that inspired the Fire Marshal's Office to file a complaint with the board. The informal conference revealed that the respondent relies on observation only and does not utilize any testing of any kind, after which he admitted that he probably should have, but believed it added an additional $1,000 to the cost of the home, but that he wouldn't do that again. At one point, the respondent reported a crack in the foundation, and after opining that it would not continue to worsen, the crack significantly failed further. The respondent reported that he conducts around 150 inspections annually. After discussion, the board found probable violations of TCA 622308A1B for gross negligence and Tennessee Comp Rules and Regs 120-02021 for failing to protect the public safety. In considering a penalty, the board considered the severity of the violations and the risk of harm to the public pursuant to Tennessee Comp Rules and Regs 120-02094C. Based on this presentation, the board authorized a consent order for voluntary revocation in consideration of the scope of the negligent activity and its potential impact on the public safety, and a civil penalty of $10,000 in consideration of a number of possible individual offenses. Update. The matter was referred to litigation for further activity on July 8, 2011. The respondent's license has expired as of April 30, 2012, with no communication since the complaint was initiated. Based on the information presented, the board authorized a formal hearing to seek revocation of all applicable privileges and the assessment of civil penalties of $10,000. Updated information. This matter was forwarded to an outside expert, and it was determined there is insufficient evidence to conduct a formal hearing. This was done at my request because I was getting ready to prepare it for a hearing, and as you know, we do need an expert, which is part of the problem in the process for you all anyway, but we need an expert. We did get someone who volunteered to review it, and this is as a result of that review. Therefore, the recommendation is to close the case due to insufficient evidence for disciplinary grounds.
I have a question. The expert was a licensed engineer?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
All right, yeah, I'm just making sure. I assumed that, but.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's one of the few boards I work with that there's no question I have to have an expert. And by the way, you'll get this a little later. If you don't know the process for getting an expert, is very time-consuming. The quickest has been about 3 to 4 months.
At a fee-based selection.
Yes.
In any event, getting someone approved and getting the contract in place is somewhat difficult. And unlike other disciplines, you know, you can call it a civil engineer, but a civil engineer who does X. And you're not going to be able to get a civil engineer that does Y necessarily to be able to say this. They're not going to say it because they're engineers, and you know y'all don't do that. So that's part of the problem. In this particular case, and getting prepared, we did seek out the advice of what we have to review. We did seek the advice of a professional to give us the opinion of whether we could go forward with even getting an expert opinion.
One last comment. Did his license expired in 12?
Yes, and he's also...
And he has not tried to renew it?
No, he's
So-
over the age of 70, I understand, so it's...
He's basically retired.
Yeah, it's now invalid. He can't renew at this point.
Have
He
to
would
start over.
He would have to reapply.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I make a motion that we follow the recommendation of staff to close the case due to insufficient evidence for disciplinary grounds.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
2012-003521. This matter was presented at the April 12, 2012 board meeting as follows. The complaint alleges that the respondent, a licensed professional engineer, is providing architectural design services outside of his area of competence in violation of TCA 622105B1, 622308A1E, and Tennessee Comp Rules and Regs 120-02031, service in areas of competence. The complaint also contains an allegation of plan stamping. There is a previous complaint filed against the respondent alleging practice outside area of competence in January of 2004, which resulted in a letter of warning being issued. The current matter was reviewed by Architect Board member Mr. Thompson for evidence of probable cause for discipline. Based on the information that was presented, the board authorized a formal hearing with the option to settle by consent order for a civil penalty of $5,000 and a requirement to take and pass the board's law and rules examination. Updated information. The consent order was not accepted and the matter was referred to litigation on July 10, 2012. Respondent's license expired on May 21, 2013, and no reapplication has been attempted. Therefore, the new recommendation is to close the case and reconsider if new relevant information arises. Expiration means, as John told you, that you start over again. You have to pass the exam again.
Not pass the exam again.
Oh, you have to get...
Yeah. Well, you could
Good.
require them to take the
Yes,
exam
you
again.
could, and
At
you have to
least
get
the
recommendations.
law and
right?
rules.
Yeah,
Yeah.
references.
Since it was my case, I recall it was a variety of plans that he stamped, and that's why the fine was what it is. But I make a recommendation that we accept the recommendation from staff to close and reconsider if new relevant information arises.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
2013-002121. This matter was presented at the February 13, 2013 board meeting where respondent, a licensed professional engineer, failed to pay professional privilege tax for 3 years. 2 years delinquency may result in suspension pursuant to TCA 67-4-1704, which is penalties and interest, and revocations in cases for 3 years. Under the authority of the board's rules, any delinquency over 2 years is grounds for discipline pursuant to Temp Comp Rules and Regs 120-02075D misconduct. Based on the information that was presented, the board authorized a formal hearing with the authority to settle with a consent order for failure to pay professional privilege tax for 3 years to suspend registration until all taxes are paid. Updated information. Respondent did not accept the consent order, and the case was referred to litigation on March 28, 2013. The case was closed and flagged due to a license expiring on September 30, 2013. The license was then renewed through September 30, 2015, and reopened for a formal hearing. Per a letter, though, from Taxpayer Services Division dated April 2, 2014, respondent has fulfilled all reporting obligation and has paid all outstanding liabilities to the Department of Revenue. Therefore, the recommendation is to rescind the consent order and close the case with a letter of warning.
Discussion? Any motion?
Well, I
Go
do
ahead.
have a question.
No. I understand from John that if the matter had been filed, the proposal would be different, but it was not.
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the recommendation and rescind the consent order and close the case with a letter of warning.
I have a second? Second. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
We will go now to cases under board member review. The following 4 cases involve the same matter. 2009-02281. This complaint was previously presented at the February 18, 2010 board meeting as follows. The complaint was previously presented and alleges that the respondent, a registered professional engineer, committed acts that may indicate plan stamping violations in practice outside his area of competence. Plans were sent to the board from an authority having jurisdiction that was reviewing them for compliance. There is no complaint history on this respondent. At its December 2009 meeting, the board approved a review of the allegations by an engineer board member not from Middle Tennessee for indications of misconduct. Mr. Henderson presented the matter. Based on the presentation, the board approved a formal hearing and requested that complaints be opened against other involved individuals. Updated information. The complaint materials were forwarded to Associate Engineer Board member Mr. Bursey for re-review to determine if any probable cause existed for possible discipline. I'll turn it over. This one, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Is that correct? Are all have been reviewed? I will turn it over to you. Mhm.
This is a case about an existing church that was adding a roof structure to it. It was a flat roof. They're adding a roof structure to it, and as well as an addition. And it involves the church. It involves a contractor hired by the church, a metal building designer / builder from Louisiana, an engineer in Tennessee, an engineer in Arkansas, and a code official. And the code official issued the original complaint, and with the complaint being plan stamping by one of the engineers involved. And that was discussed in a couple of board meetings in 2010, which resulted in then issuing complaints against the metal building designer and draftsman for the metal building designer and the metal building company. And all that information was sent to me to review some plans as well as the complaints. And after reviewing all of that information, there's not enough information for me to draw a conclusion. I would have to have more information to know who did what when, to know for sure of what went wrong, plus another engineer that was involved that could possibly have done something wrong. But one of the contractor died. I don't know how long ago, but is deceased. The metal building designer works at another company. We wanted to call the code official to just see if we could get a clear picture of the whole, everything that happened, and the code official no longer works there. And so, in talking to Robin about, legally where we stand with being able to present a case, I recommend closure due to lack of information and lack of really a way to get that information. And nobody, I think there hadn't been anything heard from any of the parties since this case in 2010.
Question?
Just a question, was it determined that
It was, and it was really a question of the metal building builder designer. They typically, they do this design, and apparently, if they're not licensed in Tennessee, they're in Louisiana, they send it to an engineer who's licensed in Tennessee who stamps their plans, which is not according to our rules. I think that's the main charge. No, there's not really a charge to say it's not, that it's deficient in its design. It's a plan stamping charge. Not quite that simple either, but yeah. Company is still in business, I believe. I don't know that it's out of business, but.
Practice in that manner to the extent that we would need to.
That's a good question, and I think that happened in 2011, that during the course of these complaints, they had to respond to the complaint against their company, and they hired the engineer, but they didn't understand fully the rules that if you hire an engineer to do design, they need to do the design in their own. They in their correspondence, in their answer to the complaint, I feel like they recognize of how Tennessee rules read and what they need to do to comply, and they had no intent of not complying.
I have any other
Mr.
discussion?
Chairman, I move we close this case.
There are 4 cases. The 4 cases.
4 cases? All right, I move we.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of closing all 4 cases, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes.
Number 5, 2014-003151. This complaint alleges that the respondent, a licensed architect, failed to comply with the continuing education audit in a timely manner in violation of Tennessee Comp Rules and Regs 120.05.04 basic requirements. The complaint materials were forwarded to Architect Board member Mr. Headley for review to determine if any probable cause existed for discipline. The respondent's license expires on August 31st, 2015, and there is no complaint history for this respondent. I will turn it over for you to present your
This particular case, the respondent, at the time that I did the initial review, I didn't have some other backup. But what happened, he renewed his license, checked off the box about continuing education. The state sent him a letter for an audit, and he submitted an audit, and I went through it, and he met the requirements for HWS, but what I noticed was it was done in about I want to say about a 1-week span. So I approved it, but when I sent it back, I said it looks like there's something just odd about the time frame. And then subsequent to that, I was furnished some additional information from Robert, and apparently the architect he was moving his office, and he lost that data, his original documentation. And when this audit came up, he realized he had to go, have the hours, so he did it in this short time span. But the problem is, if he lost that documentation, he should have some other means to prove that he was complying with the statutes and with their laws when he renewed. And that's my response back to Robert is to have that respondent somehow provide some kind of documentation that he was compliant at the time, so we can be assured that it wasn't just checking the box off and sending in his fee. That's, my opinion is, my opinion would be to ask the respondent to provide any substantiating documentation that he was compliant at the time, so that it can answer that question. But he did satisfy it, but, you know, again, the lingering question is, you're moving and you lose all that, and I know it can happen, but if he can substantiate that he was compliant at the time, I would like to see that, so we can close the case. That we ask the respondent to provide any documentation he may have showing that he was compliant at the time he renewed his license. Given the fact that, according to what he has stated, he lost all that documentation when he moved his office from location A to location B. So if he has anything, even handwritten notes, something to show that he was, you know, I think we could accept, you know, we could close the case.
Consulting with John, he said that to address the situation in a proper manner, that what we'd have to do is defer with an opportunity for him then to provide that. So the whole, the issue.
Go ahead, Wilson.
Jerry, so the issue is he stated on his renewal that he had done all his continuing education, but he can't prove that he
cannot,
because he lost it somewhere in
correct.
his computer.
I found that in some additional documentation that Robert had, where he stated that he moved in his move from location A to location B, he lost his documentation regarding CEU, and apparently when the letter came, when he received his letter for the audit, that's when the flag went up, and he spent, as I say, about a week, maybe 2 weeks, I guess, doing online courses, whatever, to satisfy the CEU requirements.
Does he have documentation for that
part he
week
does.
that he spent doing that?
Yeah.
So why isn't he in compliance then?
Now, what I would like to see from him is something, even handwritten notes, about the original documentation. It was done in such a short time frame that I was, you know, raising the flag when I sent all the information back to the state and back to Sandra.
Sorry, I'm not following. If he spent a week doing continuing education and has documentation for that, tell me what the
I would have to have all that.
Was I think to build on what Wilson's asking, was the week that the candidate inside their review or audit period, or was it outside the audit period?
I believe, without having it in front of me, I believe it was within that period.
Okay, well, I think,
Let me ask this question, clarification. All right, so when he renewed his license, he checked the box.
Yes.
Okay, was the continuing education that he did have information on after that date?
What was submitted was after that date.
So that's kind of where the clarification.
Outside the audit period.
Right, right. I think that's what you're getting to. Okay, go ahead.
Just as a point of information, though, when that what you're describing is true, even though lost their confirmation when persons are not compliant with their continuing ed, even if they reveal practice in giving a grace period. What is that?
Yeah, and we've gone over this for the last couple of years. This has been an ongoing discussion because it's very confusing to board staff since board membership has changed over the years. I think the seriousness, but, well, how should I phrase it? These complaints are just viewed differently, I think, now than maybe they haven't been in the past. But yeah, according to the rules, if they're selected for audit and any of their hours are disallowed, they have 180 days to remedy the deficiency. I think the assumption there is that they had hours to submit originally, and those hours were, for some reason, disallowed. Maybe they weren't they were a type of education that's not permitted by the rules or some other reason. They're not relevant, perhaps, to the practice of architecture or engineering. So in that case, if any are disallowed, they have 6 months, 180 days to remedy the deficiency. Cases in which they don't have any records to submit, or where they get the audit letter and it's obvious that they went online, as in this case, and they earned all their hours after they got the audit notice.
Outside the audit period?
Yeah, outside the audit period.
And we're sure that that's the case here?
Well, I don't have the file either. I'd have to look at the file to be sure. But
I don't think that
as I
says-
recall, that's the case.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily outside the audit period. It may be between not in the 2-year period, but once they're audited, they have 180 days. So he could have.
After hours are disallowed, they have 180
Right, so he could have
days.
performed that week of online within the audit period. I don't know that he did, but he could have.
I think I'm hearing two different things.
Okay.
I'm hearing that the 180 days apply to hours submitted for consideration do not meet the. In this case, what I'm hearing Mr. Headley say is that the registrant on his renewal that he had accrued the credits, audit could not produce them, and in fact claimed that they were lost in transition. But subsequent to that, did accrue the number of hours, but outside the audit period. And again, with all due respect to Mr. Headley, I think before I feel comfortable even acting on this, I want to confirm that the hours accrued that met the continuing ed requirement was indeed outside the audit period.
We can pull the
That
file
has a
and then
big
represent it
bearing.
later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pulling that up now.
I'm perfectly
Okay.
fine with that. But just a point of information, our disallowance rule for continuing education, it does say, this is 01/20/05.11, if the board disallows claimed PDH credits, they do have to be claimed and disallowed. The registrant shall, within 180 days after notification of same, that's after notification, substantiate the original claim or earn other credit to meet the minimum requirements, so.
Even if they don't do it with the audit period, they are granted a grace period. It sounds like, based on what
I
you
think the
just
board
said.
has discretion to do that,
Okay.
yeah.
Vicki?
Yeah, I think, in my interpretation is if he lost his, if he originally checked the box, and then when he was audited, he didn't have the documentation, that's falls in the same category of having continuing education that we can't approve.
Correct.
And so at that point,
Or I would agree with you.
at that point, I would think the audit period is 180 days from when he audited, so that he may have been within the audit period.
That's what I hear.
I have a comment. In fairness to this guy, I'm assuming his story is true. In that case, I'd like for us to just send him a letter of caution that he needs to keep better records. But, it sounds like he's actually done it twice. Sounds like assuming, I mean, I'm believing him. I'm believing that he actually did it and he lost it. And then he went and did it again. And so I think he's getting his continuing education. And so I don't want to beat him in the head because of it.
My comment goes along with that too. I tend to believe that he's telling the truth, and I think the recommendation, and I believe this is what I heard, that maybe we postpone this till the next meeting to determine if he has any. I mean, he just needs a list of the courses maybe. I mean, surely you would remember 2 or 3 of the courses that you went to or did. And I think that's what you're asking, Mr. Haley, is if he can just provide something for us to sink our teeth into, just a little bit of documentation, a little bit of information, then I'm also of the same opinion that he is telling the truth. But I mean, to be fair to other registrants, we need to have some documentation. I think that he went to something, and I'm willing to believe him. But I'm with you. I think we ought to have. I went to this course or this course or this course or did this or this or this, and let's go through a little bit of that exercise. But I mean, that's just I'm not willing to nail him for that.
This is in, I'm going to read part of what he responded back to the board. Per our conversation this morning, I'm writing to explain why all my continuing education was completed during the grace period. I had completed my seminars and learnings during the period of 8/12/11 through 8/12/13, and had completed enough to satisfy my continuing education requirements, which is why I noted on my first report that I had completed enough credit. When I received the audit request, I searched all my certificates to submit to the board. We just recently moved our offices, and I discovered during that move I lost several folders of files, one of them being my continuing education file, which had all the certificates, etc. I attempted to look back through emails to obtain copies of the certificates, however, was unable to recreate the information. So at that point, I realized I would just need to complete all the required continuing education again and as efficiently as possible, which is why all of my education was done during the grace period and in such a short time period. So all I'm asking is if he can recall, handwritten notes or something, not the certificates, but if he can give us some additional documentation to sink our teeth into knowing that he was compliant. That's all I'm asking.
Well, I'm with Frank on this. I think y'all are beating up somebody. It doesn't need to be. I mean, has done his continuing education now, okay. I mean, I think we send him a letter of caution that says, we accept your story that you've told us. Be careful, don't do this again. If it happens a second time, then we're not going to be able to help you, but just move on down the road. But bringing it back and everything, you're going to be accepting his word. You're going to be back trying to decide if you accept his word again. So let's just accept it now and get it off the books and move on down the road. Now, I would like to move that we send him a letter of caution that says,
what he said.
Second. Okay. Any further discussion?
Wilson, I'll go along with that. Yeah.
All in favor, say aye. Oh, wait.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion passes to accept it, send a letter of caution, and close it. Next.
2014-003441, that the plain alleges that the respondent, a licensed architect, committed misconduct by providing services outside his area of competence in potential violation of Tennessee Comp Rules and Regs 120.02.03, service in areas of competence. The complaint materials were forwarded to Architect Board member Mr. Wagster for review to determine if any probable cause existed for possible discipline. This respondent's license expires on March 31st, 2016. Therefore, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wagster to present his opinion.
Okay. A little background, this was a building constructed, from the information that I had, basically it appeared that the building was constructed or under construction before the Tennessee Fire Marshal had found out that it was being built. And it's in a fairly remote area. And so once that was done, they had a meeting with the fire marshal and found that the plans needed to be submitted to the fire marshal because of the size of the building and the building permit. And they gave a cursory review at that meeting and had a short list, but a list of some very important items that would require correcting. And the building construction continued. There wasn't much response from the architect, and at this point, it's my understanding the Tennessee Fire Marshal inspectors have given them a temporary occupancy permit for 2 years. Now, after reviewing the plans and so forth, it was found that the architect signed and sealed all drawing sheets in the set. That includes civil drawings, structural drawings, architectural, HVAC, plumbing, and electrical drawings. And so that's the basic question there: is this person competent in sealing all these drawings? And so I reviewed the plans. Again, I'm from an architectural standpoint. And I might point out one other thing. The fire marshal noted that he had signed all these documents and questioned him and sent him a letter. As you know, they have a letter when they see something like that they send to the professional for them to sign, attesting that, yes, they are competent in all of these fields. And that was sent, just for your information, that was sent to the architect from the state fire marshal, and in that letter you're supposed to respond with that within 10 days or they will not review the plans. The letter, signed letter, he did sign the letter, he did send it back, and it's dated March 3rd, 2014. That's 160 days after the fire marshal sent the letter. So even though somehow or other they were still reviewed the plans, I'm not sure how all that happened, but that shouldn't have happened. Having reviewed the plans, I guess the main thing in question, and there are a lot of other things I'm going to bring up, but the main question is the code information on the cover sheet of the drawings indicate correctly that the building should be sprinkled. And however, the building is built without sprinkler system. And there's several things that I've found in here that put into question, knowing that the building should be sprinkled, how it got built and designed the way it is. But anyway, that's if you're in the design profession, you know sprinkling a building, especially this type, which is an assembly building, goes a long way in solving a lot of potential code issues. Makes the building much safer and allows you to do a lot of things that you wouldn't normally, that you wouldn't have to do had it been not sprinkled. Anyway, to just kind of go over the drawings, the cover sheet had what's called a code study on it. It had an incorrect building square footage, which It's what you use to determine egress and a lot of other things in building design. It did not reference what building codes are being designed under. No mention of disability codes, and no mention either on the cover or in the structural plans of design loads for live load, wind load, snow load, et cetera, et cetera. So cover sheet, per the fire marshal's requirements, or some sheet should indicate codes being built by and type of occupancy and square footage and so forth. In this case, this cover sheet does not meet any of those requirements. I looked at the civil drawing, and I think we have one of our engineers had also looked at the civil drawing, but my comments were there's almost nothing on it. There's a building on a site. The boundary lines aren't there. There's nothing to locate the building. There's no utilities. There's et cetera, et cetera. And since the building is sprinkled, there's no indication of a fire hydrant or flow tests or fire apparatus access to the there's none of that. It's very deficient, in my opinion. And if this is an example of being competent in civil design, then I don't think so. I'll let our civil engineer respond to
On that now? Or are you
go ahead.
finished?
I'm not finished, but
Oh, you're not finished.
I'll go through and then
Go
you
ahead, and
can
I'll
jump
tell
in.
you when.
Structural drawings. There are two structural drawings. The first drawing has a foundation and framing plan. The second one has a few details. But definitely these drawings do not give you enough information to design, to build the building. I mean, as an example, there are no dimensions on footings. There are stem walls shown that are block, show no reinforcing in the block, no reinforcing in the foundations. The only dimension I see was on a spread footing, and it didn't have any indication of what the reinforcing of it was. There's no indication of how, in the framing plans or in the foundation plans, as to how they're anchored. There's no indication of how they handle lateral loading. There's no shear walls. There's no break. It's my opinion, and we can, if we need a structural engineer to look at it, we can do it, but it definitely doesn't show a level of competence, I would think, to design structure. The architectural drawings, he is an architect, but, and I've got a couple of pages on deficiencies in the architectural drawings, but they just, without getting into a lot of detail, the state fire marshal actually has a document that indicates what is considered a minimal documentation for drawings to be acceptable. And there's very little there that it looks like something you'd give somebody else to figure out how to build the building. I mean, it's like a preliminary drawing almost. There are some like bathroom details. They got good bathroom details, but that's about it. That's about it. And from a fire code standpoint, it has the appearances that it was being designed without a sprinkler system. There are rated corridors and rated separation of the assembly area that if the building was sprinkled, you wouldn't have to have. One other minor little thing, if you're going to sprinkle a building, there's no indication of where or you would put a sprinkler riser. So I'm not sure what was being attempted there, but it's almost like an attempt to not sprinkle and then somehow defend your way out of it. I don't know what the plan was, but, and there's a lot of things, details, you know, it's like there's a roof structure and then there's no roof deck, but it says it has a standing seam metal roof. And it's not a metal building. So when your standing seam metal roof is running in the same direction as your joist or rafters, then there's no support on the roof. So I'm not sure how that was supposed to work. But anyway, there's a lot of detail I can go into. I'm just kind of skipping over some of it. But the mechanical design, I guess one of the things is, and again, I would defer to a mechanical engineer to actually review the competence, I guess you'd say, of that. But one of the main things is there's 7 units. It's very sketchy as to, you know, it says something like they're 5-ton LP gas-fired horizontal units. That can mean a lot of things. And it does have 7 units. If you look at the electrical drawings, there's only 6 units electrified, so I don't know about the other one. But anyway, for what it is, again, I'll defer to somebody that designs those all the time, but it looked under-designed to me. The plumbing drawings, again, we've got some plumbing piping shown. There's no pipe sizes shown. The other interesting thing is the plumbing shows the sewage going out of the building, and then there's no site plan or indication on the plumbing plan where that goes. There is a creek out back, but, you know, I'm sure they've done something, maybe septic system, I don't know what they've done. But there's no indication of how how the sewage is handled. There's no indication of where the water's coming from. And there's no design, like I said, on the pipe sizes. You know, even in the drawings, there's, you know, sanitary tees that are headed in the wrong direction and things like that. Probably not a good idea. And then the electrical drawings, on the electrical drawings, they actually had a reflected ceiling plan. And the reflected ceiling plan indicated 2 corridors that were, it was described as ceiling grid and tile, 1-hour ceiling grid, and, you know. And there are ceiling grids and tiles made to be part of a system for 1 hour, and you can get a 30-minute rating out of it, grid and tile. But anyway, and let's say there is one. There's 2 corridors, and then the main cross corridor and the main entry to the building, which are egress paths, are not rated. So how that works, I don't know. But anyway, that's not part of the electrical design. Again, I question the electrical design there. It's like, you know, some things I do know is like exit lighting. And there are several areas where exit lighting is not shown where it needs to be. So that lately we're required to have emergency exit lighting on the exterior of the building where you exit the building. None of that's shown. There's no site design for electrical that shows where it's coming from, anything like that. No smoke detection, no fire alarm system. Again, since there's no sprinkler showing, there's no indication of post indicator valve, you know, flowing tampers, and so forth and so on. So, you know, I don't see any of it that I think's competent, to be honest with you. And then my last thing is fire protection drawings, and there aren't any, even though it said the building's supposed to be sprinkled. And so You know, that's my opinion that the drawings don't meet the minimum requirements for complete submittal, and they don't meet the minimum standard of care required for any of it. At this point, I'd like to hear Mr. Campbell's, what he looked at.
Civil drawings were woefully incomplete. I think they had the survey with the building located on it and some proposed contours. There was no drainage, there was no parking, there was no handicap, there was no utility connections, there was no tie downs to the property line. There was nothing on there that would allow you to construct that building in any kind of fashion that I'm aware of. It's almost, I think as Mr. Waxer said, it's almost a preliminary drawing that you would hand to somebody to start the design process on. It's not something that you would finish up with. Just as a quick, if anybody in my office had given me that and said, I'm ready for this to go out of my office, there would not be a real pleasant conversation after that. So just zero details, and the gentleman did stamp it, did certify that he was a proficient in that, and you couldn't judge it by that.
I looked at the mechanical and electrical drawings, and I agree with the assessment. They look like 50% kind of documents. A lot missing in order to construct the job, as well as just to meet some kind of standard of care by designers. And not to mention that apparently there were no specifications at all. There's no indication of what kind. The other thing to mention maybe is in the architect's title block on each sheet. He went to the trouble listing his company as architecture and engineering, and listed civil and structural engineering along with architecture, but there's no mention there of mechanical and electrical engineering in his title block, even though those drawings are in the set with his stamp on them. So I thought that was I agree with everything Frank and Robert have said about the state of the plans.
How do you want us to handle this?
I'd like to see again, I'm not sure how to state this, but I'd like to see there be a fine assessed to this.
Just want to make sure you know that it's a civil penalty. And you can do a civil penalty for each violation that you find, for continuing violations as well. So if you had something that was repeated, you could do subsequent civil penalties for the same act if it was repeated and repeated. So in other words, if you had 10 drawings and it was an inappropriate stamp on each of the drawings, you could conceivably do a civil penalty for each of the drawings.
There are 15 drawings in the set, and start out saying $1,000 a drawing. How many sheets? 15. That's a motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. $1,000 per sheet times 15 sheets.
Question.
Before we,
I have to, any vote I have to recuse myself from, correct? Because I've seen so I just want to make sure that's on the record so that.
Question regarding sprinkler. There, besides what was said, no sprinkler drawings. And if my memory serves me correct, sprinkler drawings are submitted by a licensed sprinkler contractor in the state of Tennessee, and they submit a separate set of documentations that goes to the fire marshal's office for approval with all that appropriate information. all the calculations in that, and if that's not even in there, boy, it raises the flag up even higher.
We have a motion, oh, wait a minute.
Comment that, well, one, and, design documents have a standard of care that they have to meet too, as well as the sprinkler shop drawings, but 15 sheets, there's also the fact that the job was never submitted to the state fire marshal, and maybe that's not something that this board deals with, but I just wanted to mention that's a health, safety, welfare thing for a design professional to submit their projects to the state fire marshal.
Just after we deal with
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm just making sure the three people that reviewed this did not vote, right? Just making, okay.
Well, Ricky didn't vote.
Can't vote anyway.
Right.
Okay. The other two didn't. Okay. So that's a $15,000 civil penalty, which reflected a $1,000 per violation, and that is a violation of incompetent stamping on each of the individual drawings.
All right,
And I
now,
want to make a motion that he also takes the laws and rules.
You did read it, didn't you?
new motion. Do I have a second?
Comment to the bigger picture.
That's not what I had wanted to.
It be appropriate, since it is so egregious, thank you, that we might consider a suspension of licensure as well as a fine?
Are you saying that you're suggesting that he would agree to have his license suspended? Because that, otherwise, you have to have a hearing on that issue.
I was asking a question. I wasn't
Yeah.
making.
No,
a
I'm
mo-
just asking, clarifying it for you.
Okay.
On the complaint specific itself, I think the civil. I guess I need to reread. Do we know? On other projects that would affect public health and safety? Jeopardy to the public that there might be at this. Functional operation, is that correct?
Alfred, would you please be sure you speak into the mic?
Sure. I'm concerned that since this licensee was, I'll call it, successful in accomplishing a project that we know is in functional operation that is accessible by the public, I'm concerned that perhaps he or she may have been involved in prior or even current projects of a similar nature. And I think by virtue of us having knowledge that this individual performed outside in our assessment, outside their area of expertise, that in conjunction with protection of the public health and safety, I wonder if we need to consider requesting of this individual a list of all work either completed or in process of a similar nature for consideration. My second tier is I'm wondering if this, and I don't know what jurisdiction this particular facility was in, but I would say minimally, we would need to send a letter of notice and instruction to the local authorities that either the codes department or whoever issued a use and occupancy, because I am astonished that based on what you reviewed and what Mr. Bursey reviewed and what Mr. Campbell reviewed, that this facility was even allowed to be constructed in whatever jurisdiction it was. So two things. Should we contemplate asking this registrant to be under more scrutiny for work that they've performed? That's the first one. Second, should we do something as it relates to the local authorities where this facility resides as a act of caution?
Let me interject for just a moment, and then just speaking with Mr. Cochran. The issue of what you are addressing is one for the local fire marshal, and it's under their purview and jurisdiction to make those, state fire marshal. I assuming since they were involved in the first place, they already have notification of the particular issues. I don't know that necessarily we have the authority to send any kind of notice.
Some authority has to be. That's a standard.
Here's.
I don't think the fire marshal.
First of all, I think where this is located, and again, I'm guessing here, but I doubt there's a local, any kind, they probably didn't even have to pull a building permit. But the state fire marshal's office is aware of it, and they have done inspections, they have done plans reviews, and it's from some of the correspondence that I see, the church is raising funds to sprinkle the building. But they were given, the state fire marshal inspectors apparently have reviewed the building for safety and found, but it doesn't meet the code requirements. And I don't know what the. Have to ask them that, I don't know.
I know we have no authority in that regard, but I think minimally we need to be on record as having. Did you hear what I said?
The audience did.
Did y'all hear me
Listening on
in
the
the back?
recording.
Okay, I said, I understand the fire, Mr. Wagster expressed that the fire marshal's office has reviewed the facility and that obviously, and one outcome, the church is in the process of raising funds to sprinkle the building. But Mr. Wagster also offered that he is under the impression or believes or have been told that the fire marshal's office has also recognized some other code insufficiencies with the structure. And my concern is, since we have noticed that if we don't take some formal action in writing, that perhaps there's some culpability on our part if that facility continues to be used and occupied by
I think, let me
persons
just
of the
address a
state.
couple of issues. First
Okay.
of all, again, since I don't know your program that well, and speaking of Mr. Cochran, you have in the past sent letters of concern to various municipalities and jurisdictions,
Yes.
which you can do. As far as your culpability goes, if you have addressed the issue of this particular issue that has come up and has addressed it, it would be difficult to say absolutely you're protected or not protected, but I would think that in the end, addressing the issue and doing what you can do would provide any kind of protection that you might be concerned about. But of course, it depends. But I don't think that should necessarily be a primary concern or issue here, especially in light of the fact you are attempting to discipline the party that is involved. And let me go back to your issue of the suspension of a license so that you understand the process. There is a process called a summary suspension for a license, which a board or commission can request of an individual to have a hearing on something like that. And the process is the group can vote immediately to suspend, but then have to have a hearing within 7 days. Or you can send that you're going to suspend at an informal meeting or gathering. The problem and issue we have is that honestly, for you all, is that for a suspension except for by agreement, it would require a hearing, which is going to require an expert. Now, that means that somebody is going to have to be there as an expert to say that. So I just wanted to let you know your options that are there. and the limitations to your options.
Maybe in view of what you've just described, I mean, would it be reasonable for us to request of this registrant a history of work that they've performed and what they're currently working on, to put the onus on them to demonstrate that they haven't done this before or aren't continuing to do this?
I don't know that unless there's an audit requirement, you know, you can send a letter and ask, but there is nothing you can do to enforce that.
That could evolve into a determination of suspension or revocation.
Well,
If
again, if you can't, I don't think that, this is legally, I don't think you could go forward on the issue of revocation simply because they don't give the information you've requested unless under your rules and laws have a requirement for giving that information as requested.
But if they've clearly violated public health and safety, which we're charged.
That's the issue that you have here today.
Right.
And where you're giving him an opportunity or her an opportunity to enter into consent order for this particular issue. Other issues have to come up, I think, one at a time. I don't think you can address it by requiring them. You can ask for it, but you can't discipline for if they don't. I don't, unless you've got
Made a
something in your
motion
rules or regs that say
earlier.
no.
Did you?
I didn't make a motion, but I guess
No,
I
no
wanted
second.
to
No
entertain
second
some
was-
discussion.
Yeah, no
I mean,
second.
I guess I'll make a motion that we would minimally, I would make a motion that this board send a letter of notice or caution to the authorities, and I guess if we need to define who those are, we can, but, and again, maybe the jurisdiction doesn't have a codes department, or, I just, that just surprises me, though, that there's not other authorities in every county of the state. I know that have some authority over what's constructed and occupied as a public building particularly. So I guess my motion is that this board draft a letter of notice to the State Fire Marshal's office and any local authorities that have jurisdiction over building compliance of this issue and our concerns, and then offer some assistance, if we can, to those respective agencies on, you know, how the importance of competent design, or whatever we want to say. And I'll make that motion, waiting for a second for discussion to flesh it out or to kill it, but I make that
Do I
motion.
have a second? Okay, I have a motion, a second. Any further discussion?
Let me try to remind myself of the procedure. As I understand this civil penalty is not officially issued until either by consent or as a result of a hearing.
No.
That's not
It's by
correct?
consent, period.
But-
If you propose it, it'll then be presented in a consent order to the individual involved.
Right, but the individual may decide that he or she wants to go to a hearing.
That's correct.
So at this point, it doesn't seem to me that it's a done deal
Well, it's never a done deal
until the end. So
until the
my-
Supreme Court says they're not going to hear it.
But, well, I guess where I was going with that, is it even appropriate for us to communicate with anyone at this point about the civil penalty?
Well, that's not what I was understanding.
But civil penalty's already been voted on as a separate issue.
Well-
This-
I
this
wasn't
is-
suggesting notice.
This was a notice of
civil
taking.
penalty.
The civil penalty was already voted on.
Correct.
You were now making a motion for him to take I guess, what you stated.
Well, that the board.
Notify.
I'm sorry. Yes, the board formally notified the fire marshal's office of our concern about this location. I'm not suggesting we reveal that the board took civil penalty action against the licensee. I'm just saying, you know, we have knowledge that a publicly accessible structure or facility was constructed, and that we're just on record as saying, you know, this complaint had come in, and, you know, or that we believe that more care should be taken or something. I'm not trying to admonish the authorities necessarily as much as just notifying them or advising them as an act of caution. I'm just very concerned that, you know, this might not be the only situation out there, too. That's kind of a separate thing, but.
If I understand correctly, Frank, the complaint was made by the state fire marshal official. So I think we need to be careful if we're going to send a letter to the state fire marshal. They are the ones who brought it to our attention and flagged it. I think our concern is the fact that the building's occupied, that somebody made a decision to occupy the building when, Frank, it was more than just a deficiency in the plans. Did the actual construction fall short of code compliance, or was it just the plans?
I hadn't seen the building, but.
Okay, well,
It does, the fire marshal did generate a plans review.
Okay.
Which is lengthy.
Well, what could have happened, what I'm assuming happened is the plans are incomplete. Contractors building the building probably didn't build it according to the plans, or they may have constructed the building to meet code. And that's the state fire marshal's authority, having jurisdiction, is if the construction they feel like is safe from their field inspector, then they can make a decision that it's okay to be occupied. Our concern, I think, ought to be focused on we understand what the plans look like and the deficiencies there. Just in regarding health, safety, welfare, we'd like to understand more the decision made that allowed them to occupy the building and ask for information. I think might be more to the point.
Well, it's interesting, if the fire marshal was the source of the complaint, and I'm assuming they subsequently allowed occupancy, I would also assume, like you're assuming, that the construction was in accordance or beyond the scope of the poor plans. I mean, I hope, but we don't know any of that. We don't know any of that. That's where the vagueness of this, I agree certainly with the civil penalty of the licensee, but in terms of the public health and safety beyond just the impact of that one licensee, we know there's a building out there that we're not sure is safe. And that was the basis of my recommendation or motion to notify someone that we've been aware. Again, maybe the best action is for some authority, maybe the fire marshals, to verify that the building, other than the sprinkler, was constructed satisfactorily.
I believe they have done that because they've issued them a temporary CO.
Okay, all right. So I retract my motion.
Good.
I retract my motion.
You
Yep.
retract your second? Okay, so there's no motion on the table. So let's move on to the next.
No, there's still a motion on the table, sorry.
Yes.
You had
Which-
a motion to add laws and rules.
Yes.
Okay.
And pass. And pass. Take and pass the laws and rules examination.
We had a motion for that.
Yes, that's what
Okay,
I second that if it's not already been seconded.
okay. And so now we have a motion and a second for the laws and
Can I
rules.
second that since I recused from the early one?
Can he?
I probably can't, so don't let me second.
Well, I made the motion. Okay.
All right, so we got a motion and a second, properly done for the laws and rules. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So that passes. Next.
Okay.
35 minutes later.
I want you to know that Mr. Rob owes me big time.
Well, we'll try to move quickly.
2014-000911. The complaint alleges that respondent, a licensed professional engineer, committed misconduct by providing services outside his area of competence in the potential violation of Tennessee Comp Rules and Regs 120.02.03, services in areas competence. The complaint materials were forwarded to Engineer Board Member Mr. Balthrop for review to determine if any probable cause existed for possible discipline. The respondent's Tennessee license expires on July 31st, 2015, and there is no complaint history for this respondent. At this point, I will turn it over to your board member, Mr. Balthrop.
I had an informal hearing yesterday, and based on that, there's some more inquiry that needs to happen, and I will have a full recommendation before the next board meeting.
So you'd like to defer it to?
Yes, please.
Is that your recommendation?
Yes, to defer.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next.
Number 8, 2014-000971. The complaint alleges that respondent, an out-of-state and non-registered individual, provided engineering services regarding a traffic plan in Tennessee without first obtaining a license to do so, in potential violation of Tennessee Code annotated 62-2-102A. The complaint materials were forwarded to Engineer Board member Mr. Campbell for review to determine if any probable cause existed for possible discipline. There is no complaint history for this respondent. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. Let me try to go through this fairly quickly. There was a letter written, and it was a very lengthy letter that was, in my view, analyzing a proposed roadway. The respondent wrote the letter to what seemed to be an environmentalist group or a group that may have been concerned about the roadway and its impacts, whether there was a need for that roadway. I didn't get that piece of information, but that was my inference based on who it was to and those kind of things. He did sign the letter with his name with the PE after it. He is not a Tennessee registrant. In some areas, you would look at that and say that's an honest mistake. You know, you're used to signing something with a PE, you just do it. However, based on what I saw in the letter, I saw, again, it was a 7-page letter. It had initial goals, intermediate goals, final conclusions. There was engineering terminology used in there. Let me go through this real quick. Provide an auxiliary lane a distance of some 7,000 feet. Which would allow adequate weaving and merging, channelize the right turn movement, extend the southbound right turn lane to a length of 550 feet, reduce blocking, extend the eastbound turn lane to a length of 900 feet, provide a larger radius for the channelized right turn movement, extend the merging lane, reduce the width of the road approaching from the south. Some of the level of service discussions simply states that it would improve. But some of the changes on his letter said a signalized intersection would carry at a level of service D or E all of the 2013 traffic predicted. He basically got his traffic numbers from TDOT studies that were done in this area, and it appears to me, the respondent then adds, I'd be pleased to offer further support for the above conclusions as needed. He says that he was just doing a traffic, not study, but a traffic, like a planning document. In my experience, a planning document basically looks like this. We've got a traffic count for so many vehicles traveled, there's so many lanes, then there was a need for a third lane because those lanes are tied up. Congestion noted, they'll do some calculation work for air quality based on the number of vehicles that travels through certain intersections and certain queuing things. But it appears to me that this respondent actually started making what I would consider concrete recommendations based on data. And that's what we do as engineers. We take the data and we make recommendations. Now, just because in his report it didn't have detailed engineering designs, there was enough information when you start looking at, we're going to extend this turn lane by X number of feet, or if you signalize this intersection, it will improve it by this. You had to go through some further analysis to make those claims, it looks like to me. He didn't just say, and he spent 3 or 4 days out on site observing this, so it wasn't like it was, hey, I got the traffic numbers, went through them, looks like you're going to have an extra lane. Yeah, it doesn't look like based on future projections that's needed. It appears that the gentleman is qualified, so we've not got an issue where somebody is unqualified to make the suggestion. But A, he's not a Tennessee registrant, and B, it appears that he was using his PE stamp to give him his credibility with this group that he was preparing these recommendations for. So, my and I'll get back here if I can flip pages a couple times. He was in violation as a non-registrant. To me, again, he gave the impression that he was licensed in Tennessee and repairing plans and specs, so I would say a fine of $500 and take and pass the laws and rules examination would be my suggestion, my recommendation, excuse me.
Second. So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Anybody else? Wilson?
I don't understand, if he's not licensed in Tennessee, how can he pass the laws and rules if he's not even licensed here?
We can give it to him, and he still has to pay. He would, I mean, it's something he could take. It's just it's a test that he could take to understand that he needs to be licensed in the state to perform engineering services. Like all others that refuse a consent order, and he will continue down the path. Got the ability to object to our vote if we vote that way, and continue on, come in front of us for a hearing if he wants to.
My other question is, he did not do any design nor any drawings, right? He hasn't been hired or to do any design work or draw or prepare any plans or specifications or.
No, sir, he did not do any drawing. However, there is provisions within our rules that talk about engineering reports and engineering data. And he did, in my opinion, provide an engineering report using engineering data, that those things have to be stamped and carried forth as a licensed engineer. My concern was he was portraying himself to a group as a licensed engineer, which he was in another state, but he was not in our state. And he was using our good faith and name as engineers in the state of Tennessee to bring forth fairly detailed recommendations that fall short of design, but maybe would be in a preliminary design phase. You may publish those as part of a preliminary design, as before you go to plans and specifications. So that's
when y'all do your stamp, does it say on there what state? So if he did his stamp, he wasn't trying to say he was licensed in Tennessee. He was showing he was licensed wherever he's licensed.
He just said his letter was signed with a P. Just P. It wasn't a stamp. He didn't. And I think based on the detail, it appears that something should have been stamped as well, because again, when you make this turn lane needs to be 900 feet, or this needs to be this, or signalized, you're doing more than just the normal, we've got a congestion problem and it looks like we need to add some lane width or section with a level of service based on, I mean, it's a little bit more than just a traffic, what are those called? By traffic organization would be.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain. I don't understand it enough to.
Number 9, 2013-02-0181. The complaint alleges that respondent, an engineering company, performed engineering services by plan stamping and committing fraud by forging a seal without first being registered with the board, in possible violation of Tennessee Code annotated 62-2601. The complaint materials were forwarded to Associate Engineer Board Member Mr. King for review to determine if any probable cause exists for possible discipline. There is no complaint history for this respondent, and I will turn it over to Mr. King.
Hopefully this one's a little more simple. What happened in this situation, a contractor was building a pool for a country club. He decided he needed some more detail for the structural wall of the pool. He contracted with an engineer for one sheet of the drawing, which was the reinforcing and concrete thickness for the pool wall. He got that drawing. The engineer was later contacted by additional contractors that his stamp showed up on additional drawings. So the engineer contacted the board and was referred to the, I think it was the local jurisdiction police department and the jurisdiction review agency. So it appears that, based on the information we have, that this contractor building the pool cut his stamp out and put it on other sheets. It's a pretty serious thing. So I guess there's a criminal investigation going on based on what I saw in this. We don't really, the engineer was asked who did he think did that. Well, he didn't really know. All he knows is he had an agreement to do some structural engineering work for the pool contractor, and that's who he gave the drawing to, and then his stamp shows up on other drawings in that set, but he only did one drawing. So it would seem to me that, I'm not sure how we do this, but that the board or maybe one of our investigators should try to find out what really happened, and we should go after this contractor to determine if they did this or not.
There is a contractor board. Boards and commissions can refer based on what you've learned for potential violations.
I think, don't we have some authority to discipline non-registrants? I think wasn't that added some time ago?
Assess civil penalties against non-registrants. Correct.
If they are a violation of your laws.
Well, is that not violating our law?
Let me just ask a question. Was it, I don't know that it's unlicensed practice
Okay.
because it's a
Well,
stamp.
there's some
of
bad
a-
stuff that went on here, and somebody ought to and be able to investigate it and deal with it.
So is your recommendation that the registrant, that no action be taken against the registrant, right?
Oh, the registrant didn't do anything. The registrant had his stamp stolen, a copy of his stamp stolen. He didn't do anything wrong. It appears to me he did everything. When he found out, he started letting people know what had happened. I think he did.
Filed the complaint, just out of curiosity, who?
The registrant filed the complaint,
Okay,
notified the board that his stamp had been stolen,
Gotcha.
or a copy of his stamp had been stolen.
Fraudulent use of a stamp by others is not something we can assess.
The other person, it's not before you, you'd have to open a complaint against that other person and go that route.
I think that's what needs to happen if it's appropriate.
Motion could be made to that effect then, right?
Correct.
That's my suggestion.
Can associate members make motions?
No.
Oh.
That's why
Is
it's a
that what you
suggestion.
want? Is that what you want to have
Yes.
happen? Okay, a motion to file a complaint against the contractor who fraudulently used.
Don't know that.
We don't, but the complaint would result in an investigation that would come back with facts. So
Alleged.
a complaint is only, yes. So the motion is to file a complaint against the alleged contractor who appears to have fraudulently used a registrant's.
Second?
I'll second, but then I've got a question after that,
Okay.
a comment. If our discipline, this case gets open, our investigation is ongoing, does that automatically then get sent to, and assuming that it is a contractor and assuming that he is found guilty of this violation, does that automatically get reported to the contractor's board for any kind of discipline, or is that something we would need to make as part of this motion?
That'd be a good idea.
You want to amend the motion?
If it's a friendly amendment, I would like to add that in the event that the investigation shows that there impropriety by the contractor, that be forwarded to the contractor's board for further action by them.
Sorry to have to ask this because I'm trying to keep this up for Rob. Was there a motion for an investigation? Did I miss that? Okay, the motion is for an investigation for what?
Of the fraudulent use, the reported fraudulent use of a licensee seal by, at this point, the contractor.
Seconded, then a friendly amendment has been offered.
In the event that this investigation proves that that is true, that be referred to the contractor's board for further discipline under their jurisdiction.
Now, for the friendly amendment, do we need to act on that, John?
I accept the friendly amendment.
Then we're on the motion as friendly amended. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
What was the recommendation for the respondent? Did you have a vote on that?
I think, I think the respondent in this complaint is the contractor. So maybe that complaint is already open. The engineer submitted a complaint against the contractor.
This says the respondent is the engineering company, so that's almost, it's got to be wrong. If the engineering company made the complaint, he can't also be the respondent.
So the engineer made the complaint against the,
Contractor.
okay.
Yeah.
So then the complaint's already been addressed against the contracting company.
I guess, I think you just investigated that the engineer is
The engineer,
absolved of any responsibility in
Well-
this case, right? Is that?
no, because there is no complaint against the engineer.
Okay,
The
okay.
complaint was by the engineer against the contractor.
Okay.
And
Why didn't that go to the
Okay, I didn't get that
contractor's
either.
board?
Then this
Okay.
is not, I'm like, how? It's in the wrong venue, I think. If the engineer is alleging that the contractor did this, he should have sent his complaint to the contractor's board, not to our board. We don't have, if I understand it, we don't have a complaint against the architect or
No, but
the
we
engineer.
do have the ability to deal with that complaint with a non-registrant.
I think what it would be is the contractor that took the seal and put it on other drawings is acting as as unlicensed practice of engineering.
Right.
Because he's put it on there, and so that's his, and
That's
he's
what-
not an engineer.
That's what the,
So if there's a question that comes to us, it would be the contractor performing unlicensed practice as an engineer.
That's kind of what the motion that
So
was
are you
voted
still
on.
then go back to the investigation to determine further?
correct. Well, he's made a recommendation to get more information and to if that
Gotcha.
information comes back, then we would notify the contractor's board.
Well, and we have this engineer who states that he's,
I understand that. So I'm just trying to, so is this I'm trying to be sure I tell Rob what he's supposed to do. So is this a deferring at any ultimate punishment or penalty until this investigation is complete?
well, if we don't investigate it a little further, don't we need to be sure that this really happened?
Well, I'm just making sure
Yeah,
again.
I mean-
So
I mean, we
you're
can-
deferring it until the investigation is complete.
Right,
Okay.
otherwise we assume it happened, and
Okay.
we might hit this contractor
Gotcha.
with a stiff penalty, and it may or may not be true, but we need to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I think the case number 9 has been written, the narrative has been written incorrectly. And therefore, I don't think we can act on this at all until it is rewritten correctly, because we are saying, according to case number 9, that the respondent is the engineering company, and that's not what Steve is saying. Steve is saying the respondent should be the contractor.
That's not what
So-
the information says. That
If that was just a mistake.
I think it's a mistake.
Yeah.
And saying, instead of saying in contracting companies, he said engineering. I think it was just a mistake.
Is that the best thing to do? Do we need to revisit it because of that error, or?
If the error is on the record and you've already
Okay.
determined it, I think you're safe going with what you've recommended. Because you're deferring an ultimate action anyway.
All right, new cases.
Just looking for where it says that, in the Tennessee Code annotated Title 62, under 6205 penalties, it says, "No person shall And under C, it says falsely impersonate any other practitioner. That's what we're talking about here. So there is something here that helps us in terms of somebody using somebody else's stamp.
All right, so we're moving on.
Okay, new cases. You'll be glad to know there are only 3 left. 2014-001581. The complaint alleges that respondent, with a pending application as a professional engineer, provided unlicensed engineering services by preparing a report and evaluation in violation of Tennessee Code annotated 622101 registration. There is no complaint history for the respondent. The recommendation is to authorize a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for civil penalty of $500.
Discussion?
I move we accept the recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Number 2.
Motion passed.
2014-001591. The complaint alleges the respondent, a professional engineering firm with application pending receipt of disclosure form, and the previous respondent submitted a report and evaluation using firm letterhead in violation of Tennessee Code annotated 622601 practice disclosure. There is no complaint history for this respondent. The recommendation is to close the case with a letter of warning.
I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion
And
passes.
now, for your final review today, 2014-001601. The complaint alleges that respondent, a professional engineer, sealed and signed a document while respondent's license was expired in violation of Tennessee Code annotated 622101. Respondent's license originally expired on December 31st, 2013, and was renewed on February 18th, 2014, with a current expiration date of December 31st, 2015. There is no complaint history for this respondent. Therefore, the recommendation is to authorize a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for civil penalty of $500 and a requirement to take and pass the board's law and rules examination.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
That completes the legal report.
Back on the director's report, legislative update.
All right. Well, before we get to the legislative update, had a few other things to mention. Just wanted to give you an update on our National Regulatory Council meetings. Rick Thompson, Jerry Headley, Frank Waxter, and I attended the NCARB Regional Summit in San Antonio in early March and have a brief report on that later on the agenda. Jerry Headley attended the Southern Conference of NCARB Board Member and Educators Conference in Raleigh later in March. He'll also have a brief report on that later. And a request has been approved for Philip Lim, Stephen King, Rob Herndon, and I to attend the NCEES Southern Zone meeting in Charleston later this month. Other meetings, Bill Lockwood and I attended a career day at UT Knoxville on February 28th and provided information on landscape architectural registration on behalf of CLARB, and we also saw several architecture and interior design students while we were there. That was well attended. Hal Balthrop spoke to the senior design class at Tennessee Tech on March the 4th. He does that usually twice a year, correct, Hal? Yeah. And also, I have been invited to speak on qualifications-based selection at the Tennessee Association of Public Purchasing Conference, TAP. You heard of that before, Hal? TAP, Tennessee Association of Public Purchasing. That was a new acronym for me. They're having a conference in Franklin on May the 1st, so I will be providing information on QBS at that meeting. I wanted to make you aware of that in case any board member or members wanted to also attend that with me. That's it. It's
Where is it?
Oh, where? It's in Franklin.
Franklin.
Yeah. Is it? Are you volunteering, Hal? Oh, okay. Okay. May the 1st. And of course, Candy's already mentioned that she wanted a speaker for her September meeting. So, okay. Other issues, the rules. This was mentioned at the engineer committee meeting yesterday, but I want to make everybody aware of this. The rules that were approved August of last year are still pending at this point. They've had to be returned to the Attorney General's office because of some changes in the filing procedures that the AG previously was not aware of, apparently. So they're going to have to be refiled, and that's going to delay their implementation. So it's probably, I don't know when they'll take effect, but it'll be the summer, perhaps, sometime during the summer. So eventually they'll be approved and take effect. Grants contracts have all been approved. The schools have all received their funds, so happy to report that. And of course, we did issue a media release about the program at the end of March. I don't know if that received any attention in the press, but.
About that much in the News Sentinel.
Oh, good, okay. So we got a little attention. And also just want to make you aware that the department is in discussions with Westlaw to provide an electronic version of our law and rules on our website. Of course, we already have a PDF version out there, but this would be, I guess, a more official version provided by Westlaw. We're not sure of the cost yet. They're still discussing that. Pending legislation, it's on your iPads. I don't remember the page number right off, but 77, there we go, page 77. Just give you a few updates. Some things have changed since this was prepared. Representative Tidwell's bill at the top of your list there is not going anywhere, so it's not on any calendars. So don't anticipate that particular bill passing. The second bill on your list, provisions governing failure to pay the professional privilege tax, that bill has passed in the House, and it's been recommended for passage in the Senate. It's actually on the consent calendar for today, I believe, or maybe that was yesterday, I think. It was on the consent calendar, so it may have already passed in the Senate. And that is going to have an impact on us because, as I understand the bill, unless it's been amended some, I don't think it has, we're no longer going to have hearings regarding privilege tax cases. Right now, we have to have the hearings scheduled before an ALJ. We used to hear them before the full board if they failed to pay their tax for 2 or more years. Now, we're just not going to renew their license if they're delinquent. So that's the change that's being implemented. That'll make things easier from a legal standpoint, maybe a little harder for staff, but in some ways, because we're going to have to, flag their renewals, obviously, where we won't issue the license until, and I'm sure we're going to have to verify probably with revenue. And anyways, at least we're not going to have as many hearings. Also direct your attention to Senate Bill 2053 and 2381. That's regarding the apprentice program. It has passed the Senate, and it's also been recommended for passage in the House. I know we've been told that's not going to impact us in any way. I'm not confident that's true, so we'll see how that's going to pan out for us. At least, I mean, the bare minimum, we are going to have to provide some information on, say, IDP and what our requirements. It may be somewhat tedious preparing this report. Hopefully that's all that will be required, is just preparing a report. Of course, we've already mentioned the fire sprinkler bill that has been deferred for summer study. And the last one on the list, that's the Noah Dean and Nate Act to lessen the likelihood of electric shock drowning near marinas and boat docks. That has passed the Senate, and it's been recommended for passage in the House. I think when I checked yesterday, it's been referred to the Finance, Ways, and Means Committee in the House, so that seems to be progressing. Thought you'd be interested in that since we've dealt with the marina issue previously. And also, you do have, unless you have any questions about legislation, you do have complaint data starting on page 78. Just for your information, I won't go through all of this, but unless you have any questions about it, just gives you a snapshot of our complaints. That's all that I have for my director's report, unless you have any questions or comments.
We met yesterday. The first portion of our meeting was a joint meeting with the survey board, and it went very well. John is going to cover the 2016 NCAAS Southern Zone meeting that will be hosted here in Nashville. John?
That's going to be hosted in either April or May of 2016, and we're going to be the host jointly with the Surveyors Board. We talked yesterday about what hotels we might want to select for that purpose. NCAAS actually will negotiate the contract for the hotel, but of course we have input into which hotel is chosen for that purpose. And we will have to provide speakers and entertainment. We'll have, in working with the Surveyors Board, we'll have to come up with ideas for guest tours for spouses and other guests that attend the meeting, golf tournament. So there's quite a bit involved with that. So we've been in discussions with them about that. It's still very preliminary at this point because we don't even have the final date selected yet. And we haven't started the hotel contract process at this point, but that is something that we'll be working on for the next couple of years.
Segue, we also discussed expedited licensure for military spouses and veterans. John, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, this is a common issue that we have with all regulatory boards based on legislation that passed last year, and we've discussed it briefly in our previous meetings as well. And the consensus of the engineer committee, if I can speak on their behalf here, I guess I can since Hal's recognized me, was to support the, he blessed me, is to support the language that's proposed, and that's further on the agenda under proposed rule changes. They are supportive of that change, and we can discuss that further when we get to that point, but just for your information.
We also discussed evaluation of foreign experience in licensing, and Steve is going to cover that topic.
I think there's a trend in Japan for their examiners council to look toward the United States and individual states to see how they might develop MOUs with the states to license their engineers. They're in your iPad starting on page 4. There's some documentation there of some MOUs with other states. I think the committee felt like it's a good idea to investigate it. What I think we decided to do was to talk to Wilson to use some of his contacts in the economic development area within state government to see what that department feels like, if this is a advantageous thing for us to pursue. It would require some statute changes because I think I recall that we have a requirement for a residency for some period of time for a foreign engineer could be licensed in Tennessee. And I have mentioned that to Wilson, and he's going to do that and come back to us at some point later to give us a suggestion of who we might talk with.
We also discussed the uncoupling of the experience on the PE exam, and Robert's going to address that.
We're again looking at this, what we call taking the test early before you get the experience and still getting the experience. I believe the recommendation from the engineering committee was that we have a joint task force with the engineering societies as well as a board member or two, however that works out, that we continue this discussion. The issue that's going to come about with the experience is several of the states around us and several of the states whose engineers come and do work in the state of Tennessee have passed this requirement, or passed this provision so that their engineers may not be able to be licensed in the state of Tennessee because our laws and rules are different. And while that may seem on its face to be a no issue, it could also be interpreted as restricting commerce and trade as well. So we need to make sure that that we have a good answer. But right now, we're not in a position to make any kind of final recommendation. We're going to continue to monitor it. Some statistics that came yesterday to us that were interesting were the pass rate for people that had 3, 4, and 5 years of experience before taking the test was very much higher than any of the other groups. So that's that's, that's just information at this time. We don't know if there's enough out there, but we will be contacting the NSP or TSP and ACEC and some of the other stakeholder groups to kind of have a task force to address, to continue talking about this and continue monitoring it, because it may be something that
We also talked about the PE exam converting to computer-based testing format, and you may recall that the FE, beginning in January of 14, is now exclusively computer-based testing format. John, did we have any other information just other than the PE format is continuing to evolve on the computer-based testing?
And I gave you some information on the fundamentals of engineering exams since it's become computer-based, but
I've got those figures, but I won't recite them unless anyone's interested. So the next topic we discussed was the use of a PE seal on review letters, and Ricky is going to cover that.
We received a question from an engineer who was working on a project that an industrial type setting where there was a equipment base that was manufactured in Italy, and a code official was asking the engineer to stamp the drawing of that detail for that equipment stand. And this is an equipment stand that's a big thing. It's like a mezzanine that people can walk on and under, and equipment would be on. And this caused us to just look in general at that situation. So we came up with 5 answers of what could be done depending. One is you can't stamp a detail that somebody else drew and designed. You can't put your PE stamp on that. That would not be correct. You can stamp a detail if you get a detail like I mentioned on the mezzanine, and you do all calculations you need to prove that it's okay, and you redraw that, then you can produce a detail that you can stamp. You could use your PE stamp on that. Third case is if you receive this type of submittal, the code official is asking you for your opinion on this piece of equipment. You can write a report that you can stamp, and because that's part of our rules of conduct, you can write a report, and in that report it certainly gives you the opportunity to state limitations, any limitations of your response. Fourth is, in an industrial setting, it could be that it meets the industrial exemption part of our rules, which means it doesn't need a stamp. So you could make a case to a code official that it's part of the industrial exemption. And you can also if those kind of details, there is provisions in our rules that you can incorporate details like that into a bigger drawing, because that's information from a trusted source, and that would be like hangers that are manufactured. Design engineers don't get into redesigning hangers and things like that. So there's that option. So at this point, we're going to draft a policy statement that everybody's going to review, and when it passes.
So we'll hopefully present something to the full board at the next meeting on that, okay? We also contemplated a complaint submitted that by, I'm assuming a registrant, that an individual was publicly representing themselves as an engineer and using the title engineer in their LinkedIn posting. And so after much discussion, well, let me say there was a letter from once the board office received that notice, they subsequently sent the individual in question a notice that they were using the term engineer that was in violation of the code as it relates to the use of title and of engineer and architect, et cetera, and gave the individual 30 days to respond, by which their attorney responded and indicated that they believe that this individual was acting under the exemption categorization under Tennessee Code 62-2-103. After discussion yesterday, since LinkedIn is a public forum and not an internal method of communication by which an exemption would apply in terms of, in our case, industrial exemption, where an individual classifies themselves as an engineer within the confines of the industry or company of which they're working, and because LinkedIn is a public forum by which may cause confusion to the general public that someone could offer engineering services, and also by virtue of the fact, in this particular case, this is a software company, and there is a process by which an individual can become licensed as a professional engineer in software engineering. We had decided that we would subsequently reject the notion, I guess, that the attorney had offered on behalf of their client concerning the use of the term engineer in the public forum. And by virtue of such, writing a letter to that effect to the, I'm assuming to, and I don't know that we qualified this, the letter would be written back to the individual and not necessarily the attorney. Is that correct? Okay. So just an FYI on that. If anybody has any questions, let us know. And the last topic that we discussed yesterday was the issue that Ms. Toller brought up earlier, and that was part of the discussion, considering the professional services selection on state building commission projects that currently allow the qualification-based selected prime consultant to use cost as a factor to assign subcontractor or subconsultant work. We're going to continue with that discussion. We might ask that, and Candy, I don't know if you've done this or y'all have done this, maybe you have, and I apologize, but if ACEC and TSP have a formal position, have we received anything? Well, we had it today, didn't we? I apologize, we did get it today. You may all have a copy. It's from ACEC, and it basically states the position that Ms. Toller expressed during the technical or professional society reports. So we will take this under advisement, us being the engineering committee, and then we will make another, we may make a request of the full board at the next meeting. And that's the end of the engineering report.
Thank you.
This morning, Jerry, Frank, John, and I, and topics. One is the development program through NCARB on page 89. The last paragraph is pretty clear what it is. It's allowing interns to go back and collect some of their time served for the past 5 years, but only at a 50% rate, because they weren't part of the 6-month rolling clock, and so as a gesture to try to help them get along, that they're doing that. Second thing was the educators conference. Jerry, are you on?
I'm going to defer. I'm last on the hit parade for the meeting.
All right, and then we'll go to the mutual recognition agreement from. Urban, my battery's dead. Blank. The mutual recognition agreement from NCARB and CALA is the Canadian Architectural Licensing Association, or whatever it stands for. There are 9 states who have not signed that mutual recognition agreement, of which Tennessee is one, because it restricts us from asking for additional information, which is not per our law. Am I correct, John? Yeah. So we have not signed it, along with 8 others. And basically what it does, it would allow you to be licensed in the state of Tennessee if you're Canadian, by submitting your in-car package, and we reserve. So since that has happened, we've had 2 Tennessee architects that have applied in Canada, and they have been rejected because we did not sign.
Quid pro quo.
So that's our report. Brief and quick, unless anybody's got anything else to add.
Unfinished business? Thank you.
All the action items have been completed. You have, all the action items are complete. We do have
Okay.
some
I just wanted to look at that.
rule changes to discuss.
Okay.
You want me to proceed with that? Okay.
Yes, please.
All right, rule changes. Most of these have already been presented to you at previous meetings, so I won't go over all of them. You've got the amendment to the proper conduct of practice rule. That's the first bullet there. That was discussed way back in October at our planning session. The second one is a significant change from previous versions. This amends our QBS rule, not only to update the statutory citation, but also to address some concerns that were discussed at the last meeting that maybe it needed to be more specific to include proposals and not just reference contracts. So this is some wording in which we borrowed from Nevada's rule. It states that a registrant, well, the proposed rule states that a registrant may not submit any information as part of a proposal for a public project to the state or any of its political subdivisions that would enable the governmental entity to evaluate the proposal on any basis other than the competence and qualifications of the registrant to provide the services required, thereby precluding participation in any system requiring a comparison of compensation. This rule shall apply only to proposals submitted to governmental entities that are prohibited by TCA Section 124107A from making a selection or awarding a contract on the basis of competitive bids. And the rest of the rule reads exactly the same as our current rule does. So it's just trying to clarify that it doesn't apply only to contracts, but proposals, and just trying to make that a little clearer. And let's see here, what's the other changes? You got changes to the misconduct rule. And then we move on under all professions. You'll see the amendment to implement Public Chapter 122, which requires expedited issuance of licenses for veterans or spouses, waiver of renewal requirements for those on active duty, acceptance of military education, training or experience if substantially equivalent to state standards. This includes, in paragraph 1B, language about a temporary permit, which the board has expressed opposition to. However, in discussions with attorneys in our department, we've been instructed that the law that this is based on, Public Chapter 122 that passed last year, the law requires us to have a temporary permit procedure, and this rule makes it permissive. It's drafted permissibly. It says that the board may issue a temporary permit. You're not obligated to do so. I've been told that the board can choose to never issue a temporary permit. We just have to have the process in our rules. Does that make sense? We have to have the procedure in place. You don't have to ever invoke that clause. You never have to use that procedure, but we have to have it on the books, so to speak. So it's been recommended, and the engineer committee concurred with this, that we go ahead and adopt this wording that's been provided to us, with the understanding that it'll never be utilized if it's felt that it would in some way endanger the public's health, safety, and welfare. Yeah. So we would recommend that, acceptance of that wording. And the rest of it, I believe, nothing has changed None of the other proposed rules have been altered at all since they were last presented at our February meeting. So I don't know if, Robin, if they need to make any motion on whether they accept this at this meeting or to
To
offer.
go through the rulemaking process?
Yeah, to initiate the rulemaking process. Of course, we have to draft a rulemaking hearing notice, and that has to be voted on along with economic impact, et cetera, et cetera.
They can make a recommendation to go forward with the process.
Okay. So you vote on going forward with implementing these changes.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, recommends moving forward.
And also, you have a commissioning policy draft that's provided behind the proposed rules. Commissioning of engineered systems. This has been reworded from what was presented at the last meeting to include architecture and the wording with the appropriate expertise. And this has been, of course, previously distributed to everyone for your review. Policy.
A second? Do we have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Accepting.
Good for unfinished business.
Okay, new business. Wilson, you're up.
Mr. Chairman, the nominating committee has met, and we offer the following recommendations: that beginning July 1, 2014, that Rick Thompson, we nominate to serve as chairman, Robert Campbell for vice chairman, and Susan Ballard for secretary.
They're just making a recommendation. It'll actually be voted on at the June meeting. And then, as Mr. Borden noted, they'll take office effective July 1st, per the bylaws. We have bylaws.
Word on NCARB Regional Zone.
Okay, this was held in San Antonio on March 6th through the 8th. You do have a written report provided, so I'm not going to read through all of that. I'll just note a few highlights from the meeting. As Rick mentioned earlier, we did discuss some proposed changes to the intern development program, one of which would allow them to count experience that currently cannot be counted because of the 6-month rule, so it sort of loosens that requirement to some extent, the 6-month reporting rule. There is a licensure task force that is currently meeting, and I understand it's going to be meeting probably for the next couple of years to explore the creation of an additional path to licensure that will expedite the licensure process. This is a common theme among all the professions, trying to speed up the licensure process. One option being considered would allow licensure upon graduation. Not sure how that's going to work at this point. They're requesting proposals from schools of architecture as to how that could be implemented. So, as I mentioned, they're going to continue their work for at least another year, probably beyond that. We've already discussed the mutual recognition agreement with Canada, which has been signed by the majority of jurisdictions, but not Tennessee. And of the resolutions that were presented to us at the meeting, the one that generated the most discussion was an amendment to the bylaws that would require nominees for regional director for a certain officer position within NCARB to have an active NCARB certificate. That generated a lot of discussion because many felt that it would limit the pool of candidates to require, and it would be comparable to requiring candidates for certain NCAAS officer positions to have a model law engineer record with NCAAS. That, for the engineers, that's what this would be comparable to. So that generated a lot of discussion. And it was interesting, in our regional meeting, several states expressed concern about use of the title interior architecture by interior design programs. And I've provided the letter that we sent to jurisdictions back in December to Alabama, Florida, and Louisiana, because all three of those states expressed concern about that issue as well. So just wanted to mention that. And that's all I have, unless the architects want to add anything else. Yes, and I went to the Alamo.
Oh, yeah. On March the 6th, the 178th
Yeah.
anniversary day of the.
It was. But we were in meetings at that time, so we didn't get to see
Was
the,
Davey
or maybe
there?
you weren't, I was.
Sorry, John.
Remember the Alamo?
Would you repeat the states you sent the letter to again? Alabama,
It was
Florida?
in Louisiana.
Just 3 or 4?
Yeah, just 3.
Three, Louisiana, okay.
Yeah, we're the 4th, so.
Report on the South Carolina NCARB meeting?
Yes, it was a
Sure.
2-day event, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning. Friday afternoon, we had, there was one presentation from the gentleman he's involved with the IDP program, and we did, after he made his presentation, we had breakouts. And the group that I was in, two interesting things came about out of it. One is about the length of time it takes to become a licensed architect and do the IDP program. And the IDP program is basically up to the individual. If they want to just drag their feet and take longer, that's fine. If they want to get on board and really work on it, they can complete it. In our discussion, when we were talking about it in the architects meeting, Rick had pointed out that he has a young lady who's an intern. She's going to have her IDP completed by the end of next year because she's working on it. So the bottom line of it is, as far as architects are concerned in the IDP program, it's left up to the individual to do it. One interesting thing that came out of Saturday afternoon session, North Carolina State, they get their architectural students are actually start working on their IDP requirements while they're in college. And then the second note was the young lady that was facilitating our group, she had brought up the fact that when she went in college and she was taking her architectural degree, the initial time, she didn't realize that her credits were not going to be transferable. So when she apparently transferred to NCS, she found out that her credits were not transferable. Therefore, she was basically starting over from square one. But also, an interesting, the other part of it is better educating the counselors, whether at the college level or even down to the high school level, about the requirements a person goes through to become an architect. Because unless you know about all these various things, the IDP program, what you have to do, depending on whether you get the BA or the MA and how that affects you, and about making sure that what you take, you can transfer from one college to the other, is very important. Therefore, some counselors at the college level might not be aware of it, and more so, especially in a high school environment. Because I had a gentleman talk to me Sunday at church about his son wants to become an architect. And I told him, I'm glad to sit down with you and your son and we'll talk about it. So that he's aware, his son is aware of all these steps he's going to have to go through. But it was a good weekend, and hopefully I can attend the next one 2 years from now. But that's my report.
Other business? I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second, and I guess we're done. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.
Rick also.
All right.
I know.
The weather's, it was beautiful driving over here yesterday. I know. Did you turn yours off already?
That should have taken.
Okay, that's what I was asking.